Meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 22 to 27 mandate. Members and those in the public gallery, you're welcome to use mobiles as long as your phone is either on silent or airplane mode. Not permitted to take photographs or record the meeting. Item 1 is apologies and no apologies, but two members, Jerry Carroll and Nicola Brogan, are joining us on Zoom. Agenda item 2 is a declaration of interests. Members, you are required to declare a declaration, any relevant interest at the start of any meeting. Does any member wish to declare an interest? Nope. Okay. Item 3 is chairperson's business. So 3.1 is a promotion within the department that we have been made aware of. Louise Crilly has been temporarily promoted to the head of the Departmental Solicitor's Office. So that is to note, unless anybody wishes to make any comment on that. Agenda item 4, draft minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of June 24. Members, at page 3 of the tabled pack, you will find the minutes of the last week's meeting. The minutes in the main meeting pack had a small typographical error, so they're on page 3 of the table pack with a slight revision. So if members are content with those revised minutes, that they're a true reflection of the meeting on the 19th of June, then I will sign them. People are content?
Thank you.
Grand, okay. Now, the next agenda item is, brilliantly, an oral briefing from the head of the Civil Service. Ask and ye shall receive. As they say in the northeast of England, shy bairns getting out, and we were lucky enough that miraculously, after remonstrating about some of the delays in getting this signed off, it was signed off. But so we are very lucky and pleased to have witnesses giving us evidence. First of all, before I introduce them, I can just seek members' agreement that we ask Hansard to record this agenda item. Agreed. Okay. So. Members, on page 17 of the briefing pack, there is a briefing note to assist members on reform of the NICS, its functional and strategic priorities. And in the table pack, there is a Department of Finance paper on HR reform, previously considered as part of the Department of Finance briefing on the 10th of April. The PAC report on capacity and capability in the NICS, which was published way back in 2021. A DOF memorandum of reply to the PAC report back in 2021, and a DOF paper on implementation of the recommendations of the RHI inquiry. I suspect that some of our questions may stray beyond the narrow confines of civil service reform. I'm sure the very talented officials in front of us will not hold that against us if we ask one or two questions that do stray slightly beyond those limits, but we are formally here and do want to cover those strategic reform questions, and thank you very much for coming to give us evidence. So we have Jayne Brady, Head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, Neil Gibson, Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance, Jill Min, Director of People and Organisational Development, Department of Finance. We do very much welcome that you're here and that we're able to confirm that, and we appreciate you giving up your diaries are very busy, and we are pleased to be able to hear from you. So we would invite the Head of the Civil Service to make some opening remarks, and obviously any other, if Neil or Jill wish to say something, that's perfectly in order too.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today. I have with me, as you've mentioned, Chair, Neil Gibson, Permanent Secretary, Department of Finance, and Jill Min, who is our Strategic Director of People and Organisation Development. We'd be very happy to take members' questions, but I would like to begin with a strategic overview of reform and transformation and a summary of the developments to date, as well as the proposed next steps. And probably I would describe where we are as much done, but there is still much more to do. Members will know that I and colleagues across the civil service worked intensively with the parties, and many of you are here today through 2023 and earlier in this year in preparation for the formation of an executive. And that work focused on a number of areas. It focused on building a shared understanding and evidence base for the complex challenges facing an incoming executive. And of course, at the core of those areas were the fiscal position, where funding had fallen below need within Northern Ireland, and also the addressing the legacy of the governance gap during the period that we had no executive. Members will also be familiar with the language that we adopted during that work to capture potential priorities for an executive, and may recall the 3 missions of people, planet and prosperity. Those included addressing the structural issues within Northern Ireland in terms of improving life opportunities and indeed life expectancy, increasing productivity in our economy, and also tackling the opportunities and challenges of climate change. The core of our thinking and advice was that complex, multi-dimensional challenges such as those simply can't be placed in one departmental silo, and I know that's a core aspect of reform and the recommendations that have been provided. They need a whole of government or whole systems approach, with the civil service working collectively across organisational boundaries under the collective direction of the executive. For the civil service, that requires us to challenge ourselves as officials and to be willing to change our established and familiar ways of working. Doing so requires us to build on the known strengths of the service, our ethos, our core ethos of public service, our commitment to evidence-driven advice, and our focus on long-term outcomes and improving the lives of the people that we serve. But it also means changing the things that we have not been good at, applying the lessons of past failures, recognising that we are good at writing strategies, but perhaps sometimes less good at delivering them, and, above all, recognising the need to renew and to re-equip our civil service with a broader range of skills to support the executive in meeting the new challenges and the opportunities ahead. Chair, we have made a start to renewing the civil service, and I would like to discuss two examples in particular. Firstly, the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board has been reconstituted with new terms of reference and the appointment of high-calibre non-executive members. When recruiting those members, we look towards specific skill sets which our view as we required for the transformation and reform of the civil service. They have considerable public and private sector experience, commercial and business acumen, as well as public sector reform experience, and they provide a constructive external challenge to our work. The Board oversees the Northern Ireland Civil Service collectively and contributes to the development of key analysis and advice to the Executive on our investment strategy, our people strategy, and our portfolio of major capital projects. Secondly, and very timely, I'm delighted to advise that Professor Helen McCarthy from Queen's University Belfast has been appointed recently as the Executive's first Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor. Helen is an internationally recognised leader in science and technology, and her appointment means that Northern Ireland science will now have a voice at a national level, as well as putting science and technology at the heart of the Executive's work. Chair, I acknowledged earlier that there is still very much to do. There is more to do in agreeing a fiscal framework with the UK Government to put Northern Ireland's public finances on a sustainable footing, with a genuine fiscal floor that reflects evidence of need. On transformation, on which you will hear more from our colleagues in Department of Finance later, the Minister of Finance has asked me to chair an interim transformation board with the aim of providing advice to the Executive on investment priorities for transformation and how best to drive delivery. The First Minister and Deputy First Minister have asked me to explore the establishment of a new reform and transformation division, which I envisage operating across the Executive Office and Department of Finance. And central to that would be a new delivery unit to help drive delivery of the Executive's priorities. David Malcolm has been appointed as Interim Perm Secretary of the Executive Office, and he will assist us in taking this work forward. Neil and Jill will also want to say more about our new 5-year people strategy, which aims to re-equip the civil service with the new skills needed to deliver the Executive's priorities. My priority as the head of the civil service will be to renew and to re-equip the service to meet the challenges set by the Executive, and I look forward to reporting further progress as we move forward. That was just a quick summary, Chair, and I and colleagues would be happy to expand on any of the points made.
Okay, thank you very much. As always, committee colleagues, please indicate to the clerk or myself should you wish to come in. Thank you very much for that opening comment. Jayne, just on some of the outworkings of the RHI inquiry, in the update report that was produced in March this year, recommendation 28 of the RHI inquiry talked about the culture of record keeping or poor record keeping within the civil service. Now that and the update report was marked green in terms of RAG rating and is implemented. Given some of what we've heard at the COVID inquiry, I'm tempted to ask, to quote Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, is that your final answer? Do you really think that that's implemented? And are you comfortable with civil service record keeping given what we heard at the COVID inquiry?
Yes, and obviously we all gave evidence in the COVID inquiry and acknowledged that there were issues that were identified. I guess also in terms of the COVID inquiry, and I was first in this committee in November 2021, but one of the reasons I applied to join the civil service was I saw the tremendous work that the civil service and ministers across the service delivered during the pandemic, and actually the appetite for change that had been delivered. Notwithstanding that, of course, there are issues, and we always have areas where we could and should have done better. There were specific instances there in terms of the record management. Particular issues were non-disclosure of handwritten notes. The substantive notes for meetings were provided. I would say that was one disclosure in tens of thousands of documents were provided. That doesn't excuse the non-provision of those areas. There has been actions immediately taken in terms of addressing those issues, both at delivery in terms of the functions, but also at a technology system. And I know one of the areas in RHI was looking at a use of technologies and content management as a system, and that has been explored. One of the areas that we have pursued forward is the reconstitution of our information governance board, which is led through Departmental Finance, and I have met with the Information Commissioner regarding that and our network of SAROs, so that we can reconstitute that to address what learnings we need to take forward. I think also one of the key areas for me, and I come perhaps with the technology background, is sometimes our technology platforms work against us, and I know this was also a recommendation in RHI, and the use of systems such as Content Manager. We have now rolled out Office 365, a cloud-based system for modern day record and content management. I think sometimes what I have observed is we conflate official record management with document management, and those should be two separate things, and Office 365 allows us to do that. That's been rolled out to 27,000 staff in the last two years. It is now available on mobile platforms, which again identified some of those issues, and it's on around 30% of those mobile devices. So my view is that we need to put in place our technology and systems which actually act in line with the policies and the processes that we have in place.
And not wipe phones.
And that also includes mobile phones. So at the moment, Office 365, prior to the rollout of Office 365, there was no firewalls which were there providing that cloud-based facility. That is now available on mobile phones.
Since the COVID inquiry revelations in terms of widespread wiping of phones by particular groups, particular ministers or particular aides, have you as head of the civil service issued any new instruction to executive ministers to underline that first of all, WhatsApp should not be used to do substantive government business, and number two, mobile phones should not be wiped?
So there was guidelines in place prior to that in terms of the use of non-official channels in official communication, non-official channels, which is a core part of our guidance. It's also in the guidance to advisors and to ministers, indeed to officials. We are in the process of updating those guidelines to make them policy. That will be through Department of Finance, and those are to be rolled out in the next number of weeks. We'll be happy to bring those back in terms of those. I think some of my observation, having analysed many different policies and procedures, is that actually the navigation of those, whilst they may be on a website or indeed training provided on them, the actual coherence of the ones that we need to deliver and make sure they're implemented, there's less, and it's via assurances. So we're looking overall, and the first task of the Information Governance Board is the coherence of where the policies and strategies are, which ones are centralised from the Department of Finance shared service and which to be delivered.
Do you mean, are you talking about the Civil Service Code, or are you talking about the SPAD Code? It feels a bit, I take that as a reasonable observation, but I think people listening will say, well, if we are 4 and a bit years on from the publication of the Cochrane Review, and the head of the Civil Service is saying we kind of need to tidy up the intranet a bit to make sure that guidance is visible, people might think, well, why isn't it being kind of presented in a single coherent thing on day one to new ministers and SPADs Given the seriousness, given first of all the cost of the Cochrane inquiry, people I think will be a bit surprised that this is kind of buried away on an intranet somewhere. Is that not a...
No, it isn't buried away, so the guidance is clear on the internet. I guess for me it's the communication of that and to make sure that we just don't launch an internet that's embedded and it's repeated and it's reinforced, and that we're not just and that we are moving to provide those in a mechanism which is beyond the guidelines that it is in policy position as well. So and how that is developed within our information governance network.
What would be the difference moving from guidance to policy? What's the substantive difference from the perspective of a senior civil servant or a special advisor, just for people out there who don't follow these things closely? What's the difference between guidance and policy?
So obviously guidance is to be provided in the framework of those. Policy has a performance issue related associated with that as well. So obviously there's the initial guidance provided. I think there's an area as well of where we have what is centralised overall at a Department of Finance shared services level and what is devolved to departments. At the moment, information governance is devolved under the accounting officer responsibility for a permanent secretary, but we do have a network of information governance officers, appointed SAROs as they're called within each department. Our view is that needs to be structured more centrally, even if we do not have the hard enforcement through those levers. How can we actually ensure that there is common knowledge and understanding of the implications of those? I think the particular instance that was shown is that under a public inquiry of where the rules of retention are changed, then there is different areas that there's different content and retention storages that need to be considered.
So in summary, guidance needs to become policy, and policy needs to be communicated in a clearer and more singular way.
I think there's a communication, and then our systems and processes, our technology needs to be enabler of that as well.
Okay, just the reporting capacity and capability that the PAC, I suppose declare that I was a member of the PAC for part of this period. The very start of the report, recommendation 1, says radical transformation of the Northern Ireland Civil Service and addressing the array of cultural, structural and operational changes required to make it a successful organisation will only be possible with strong governance and accountability arrangements. Are you confident that radical transformation of NICS has happened or is happening?
I'm confident it is happening. I'm confident that we are not yet completed that ask. I think that the steps that we put in place, and I talked about earlier, is where is the governance and accountability. Obviously, it is. We are accountable to the public. We are accountable through our code of ethics. We all work under the direction of our ministers. Committees like this are very helpful to bring us to account. But also within the civil service, some of those structures and areas where there isn't a natural centralised structure to enforce those, in my view, needs to have a further governance vehicle. So the Civil Service Board and the reconstitution, that was a core area. Yeah. We identified a number of programmatic areas we need to focus on. One was the major capital project, one was our people transformation, and the other was the reform, the programme for government. And because those are inherently cross-cutting, we cannot reform, we cannot change everything. We need to focus on the areas where history, where analysis, where reports have shown that we have fallen short, but also where the opportunities ahead. So in the recruitment for those non-exec members, I purposely went out with a particular skill set that I wanted to recruit into those areas to lead. For example, our major capital projects, our perm sec in that is formerly a merchant banker from Morgan Stanley, established the British Business Bank, a chief commercial officer, chief operating officer, very significant commercial governance experience. He now chairs a subcommittee for the ISNI strategy, the major capital projects, going into depth in terms of those recommendations. My concern was that attendance of officials just at a board without that central governance and challenge function would not provide those facilities. There is much progress has been done in that regard. In terms of our people strategy, we appointed an individual from a private sector background from an organisation called Novartis. She was the chief people officer there for 20 years, an organisation of 120,000 people, 50 billion plus revenue. She led the transformation of that service. She also led the transformation from a prescribing-based function within a pharmaceutical client base to a citizens, a person-centred, patient-centred approach. So she is leading that subgroup in terms of people transformation. And the third appointee that we took, we're very delighted to have appointed, comes from preeminent economist across these islands and from the public sector, and has been involved in public sector reform. She has chaired the ESRI committee for the south of Ireland. She's advised the Scottish Government. Right. So that is the third strand that I talked about, that reform, that programme for government. How do we drive those forwards? Obviously, we need an executive to be in place to drive those areas. Yeah. We've made much projects on those further too. So those are some of the key structures. I think the other, and this will be for ministers to decide, we operate under the direction, is that's necessary but not sufficient in itself, because it has no political legitimacy. Some of these areas are beyond political input, such as some of our HR aspects of delivery, but much of them are in terms of HR policy, programme for government, obviously. So part of the areas that the First and Deputy First Minister have asked me to look at, and indeed the Departmental Finance Minister, is what actual hard levers and structures can be put in place. One of those is looking at the Reform and Transformation Division. The nature of that encapsulates some of the areas that the MOU was defined between department, but creates hard structures. That's fiscal framework, sustainability, the Transformation Board, Minister of Finance asking to chair that in a cross area, and also the 235 million of funding, which I know you'll hear about later.
Well, and we may even ask
that provides a route to transformation. Because some of this you talked about earlier, some of this is the culture. You know, how do we improve and nudge a different way of thinking, a different way of working, and some of it requires soft communication, but some of it requires hard levers. And
is it, in terms of culture, obviously, as you say, you've said there's an interaction between the political and clearly the official. In terms of cultural shift, it's probably not a great sign that a statutory committee had to chase First and Deputy First Minister's office in order to get agreement that the head of the civil service could give us evidence. Is that fair?
I wouldn't say that is fair. There was at no position did any of the FM or DFM at any point say I should not attend this. They have never restricted my attendance at any event. I know that their diaries are sufficiently busy, and I apologise if that impression was given to you, Chair. But there was no inference from my engagement at all that they did not want me to attend this meeting. And I think they welcome the opportunity as well.
I'm glad you're here, Just on the programme for government, which you mentioned, clearly programme for government is going to be critical in the test of the civil service, and the executive will be delivery of a programme for government. But first of all, we need to see a programme for government. When are we going to see it?
Obviously, the decisions on the issue of the programme for government is for FM and DFM.
Is there a draft programme for government?
And for the executive. So we have done, and we discussed earlier, and many of you have been in the room with me, much of the work in terms of areas for programme for government in advance of an executive.
I wasn't in the room, strangely enough. I wasn't invited for some reason. It might have been to do with the... Anyway, I'm being facetious.
With the parties intended for executive.
Exactly. I'm being facetious.
I did brief you in the main.
You did.
So those aspects look towards the stabilisation initially, acknowledging the areas that identified, the collapse of services, the governance gap. Those areas looked towards action, agreeing public sector pay awards and the information that was provided, the fiscal package that the UK government were outlining, the unsustainability of that because of the cliff edge. Again, progress made substantively to remove or to mitigate the implication that from 26-27 the language has been provided. Those areas, very substantive agreement, obviously, in terms of the kind of the 124, albeit need for discussion to where that is actually delivered, and also then agreement for that backdated, not from the first of the this financial year, but from when the executive was started. So very significant areas. Those were areas identified. Second advice, and again this is my advice as an incoming executive, so for ministers to decide, is regarding that need for transformation. And we see that many of our services, largely due to underfunding, but also the nature of the funding packages provided did not provide any availability to deliver long-term sustainable transformation. So that talks to the input that the ministers have asked me to look at in terms of reform and transformation. Health, 41% of our budget in 2011, 51% last year, yet our waiting lists are deteriorating and the services that we offer. Again, education, 50% of our budget is for special education needs, and how we can provide, yet we're funding less per individual, and then injustice being those reform elements. So what are the elements of transformation reform need to be looked at, and the funding provided, and then towards those long-term aspects that I talked about earlier, the structural issues. That my advice would be that we need to address. That's input and advice. We provided the information and data. There has been much work done by the parties in terms of the ministers exploring that. But obviously the ministers, as they take their seats around the table, follow a hunt process, and they want their own input in terms of those areas. I'm confident that much work has been done, and we have sufficient information. But of course, that is for my ministers and the executive to decide.
And I think it's important to acknowledge clearly that's the structure in terms of stabilisation, transformation, long-term reform. You and your colleagues have been working on recruiting when we didn't have an executive, but specifically in relation to the current status of a programme for government. Is there a draft programme for government, even if it hasn't been signed off by the executive? Is there a document which is in someone's hard drive somewhere saying in big capital letters, draft PFG?
We have been working with the ministers on the elements that they're required to be considered as part of that. That's under FM and DFM. That will be for executive ministers to provide. I might
understand that there is a programme for government, but it hasn't been agreed, or there's a draft document, but it hasn't been signed off, or there are elements of a draft document that haven't been signed off. Which of those is it?
Sure, I guess you'll appreciate that that's for ministers to give that information to you.
Sure, and it's obviously my job to ask these questions.
Under their privilege, yes. Yeah. So I can give you my assurance that there has been very substantive analysis. Also, one of the points defined earlier was where is the evidence base for this? And I think the reform and transformation are key aspects of the areas that we need to deliver, in terms of the reports. But actually, are we informed whether we're making any difference? And one of the key areas that FM and DFM have asked me to look at is that delivery unit. Yeah. So if we say we're prioritising something, how do we know we ever did get the change? If we're saying the budget's been aligned to that, and the work that we've done with NISRA to make sure that we're, building in all the significant work that was done in the outcomes framework, but building that in with the data lens to show actually where can we deliver that. So a lot of very significant work that shows that per election ward, per MLA position, but also at a section 75. So all that data can be evidenced now, and that goes back over a number of years. So again, an evidence-based perspective, which can then assist have we delivered or not. Okay. But also are things getting for those those longer-term aspirations that we need to keep an eye. Keep our eye.
That is useful to know, and it brings me to my next question, which is way back in 2021 when you were probably felt a lot younger and less stressed than now.
It's the best job in the world.
You said, I'm very clear that our plans must be more than just another set of abstract long-term ambitions. Implicit in that is that previous documents have been relatively abstract long-term ambitions. Will this programme for government, whatever form it is in at the minute, will it have clear targets that the public can judge the executive against? Will it say, for example, and this doesn't have to be specific, waiting lists, our target is waiting lists for orthopaedic operations will be here by 2027? Or another example along those lines?
Those would be political decisions. Okay. What we have provided is...
You think that should be like that, given you've said it should be specific rather than abstract?
Yeah, so the framework is provided so that they can, and I think the ministers have spoken, FM and DFM have spoken, and they're very collectively engaged about the core aspect is delivering that prosperity agenda, but we need to tackle with the things that need to be done first, starting with what matters first. Again, also, if I look towards this incoming executive, much has been achieved. There's been a budget achieved. There's been a public sector pay award been achieved. There's been an interim fiscal framework put in place. There's also been a legislative programme. So the last missing part of our Section 20 commitments is looking towards that overall programme for government.
Just finally, for me, before I open up to others, June monitoring. Are you, as head of the civil service, comfortable with June monitoring happening in the pre-election period? Have you given any advice one way or the other?
Perhaps ask my colleague in Department of Finance, because that would be a matter of advice from the Finance Permanent Secretary. I had provided advice to First Minister, Deputy First Minister, in terms of the pre-election period and the programme for government and the potential that may have in terms of launching new policies and development. Overall, there's two, it's published that the advice, and again, the Scottish Government aligned with that and did not release a programme for government using that same basis. There is the principles of the conduct of business, which business should continue as usual where that's required, and that's a judgment call in some areas because it's a risk-based judgment. We did seek advice in terms of the consultation for EQIA assessments on the initial budget outcome. Conclusion was that should progress actually because the nature of not delivering in terms of having the full EQIS assessment to make a judgment on that budget did progress. And I know that also the other actor is communications and announcements and officials being used to promote potential areas from official position. So Neil will have been the person who will have advised in terms of his minister's position on the monitoring.
Yes, and our minister has written to the effect of being content to see June monitoring progress, given the severe implications
Is that the advice
on the advice.
gave?
Yes, it is, and I'd be personally entirely comfortable with that, given the significant sums of money at stake here, but also the significant implications of potentially not meeting or coming within our budget this year.
Isn't that, it's 24, it could be literally 24, 48 hours difference. We're now a week, there's now it'll be a week's difference between doing it and not doing it. Is it genuinely plausible that it's going to be, the consequences are going to be doom-laden if we don't do June monitoring before next Friday?
Well, certainly the advice when it was provided, that window could have been a longer one than a week, so that obviously if we're thinking in a matter of days, perhaps that provides a slightly different lens, but when the advice was provided, the risk was that there could be a longer gap between the two, and we'll have to rename it obviously because it wouldn't be June monitoring.
Clearly, in terms of business as usual, my understanding is because there hasn't been a main estimate laid in Westminster, there is an anomalous position in which to do June monitoring, and there is therefore a degree of risk that is being carried by the department and the minister by doing it. Doesn't that imply that it's not business as usual because you're not doing it with a main estimate, and the minister and department are bearing a degree of risk, so by definition it isn't business as usual?
Yes, there certainly is a balance of risk to be taken here, and we must consider the fact that there isn't a confirmation of what the precise amount of funding available would be because of the UK election, meaning that figure was no longer confirmed to us. We expect to get that relatively soon. But I go back to the point that when we're talking this sum of money, each department is making very difficult decisions, providing advice to their ministers and writing frequently to say we need clarity on what funding we have available. So it is a balance of risk, but you are quite right to point out that without confirmation of that number, there is an element of risk being carried, which I'm very comfortable with. I can understand in a substantive financial sense because you can be pretty confident that the main estimate will be laid and you already know, and that your teams already know broadly what the quantum is going to be. But so that's a legal, it is a technical legal risk, but it isn't the same as it being completely business as usual. I would say that given that there inherently there's a political judgment involved, that then brings it in, to me, into the realm of the political, particularly when you're announcing significant uplifts in funding, which departments will know they're going to get anyway, but announcing it with bells and whistles, I think would ask significant questions about the observation of a pre-election period, given that it could be the difference of 24 hours. I personally think that that's not a sustainable position, and I put that on the record. But I'm going to open it up now to colleagues. First of all, the Deputy Chair, Diane Forsyth.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here, and appreciate you taking the time and being so open and frank with us. I have a few questions around sort of governance and the need for civil service transformation, and the first one is around, you talked about civil service working under the direction of ministers, and I wondered your opinion on whether the pay scale set a different scene and have potentially embedded a different culture. I had put in a question to the Finance Minister just on the salary points, and she came back to me with figures as at March 2023, where excluding arm's length bodies, we've got 65 civil servants in Northern Ireland employed on a salary point higher than our ministers, and 12 civil servants employed on a higher salary point than our First Minister, Deputy First Minister. And I just wondered, do you feel this is an appropriate structure? Is it because of long service, or is this something that you would consider a review?
And maybe bring perhaps Jill and Neil in a broader kind of policy position. But I think it was clear that the RHI made recommendations that we should have in some areas of capability that actually are outside standard pay scales. And I know that some recruits into the civil service have taken actual pay cuts because their desire to be in those areas. We obviously are playing in a competitive market, so that needs to be ensuring that we have the best people with the most correct skill sets. I know in some of our professional areas, Mr. South, such as veterinary areas where we've had difficulty recruiting those areas, particularly in digital transformation, when we talk about transformation, and I see that as a core tenet of actually the reform position of how we present our services, which will deliver significant value. And also we're contracting significantly to external organisations for delivery of that. My view is that we need to build in that competency within our service, and we need to have the best people to do that. Of course, that needs to be measured against what's affordable in those areas, but ultimately it may be an area where if we don't have those skill sets, we can have significant areas. Obviously, the pay scales and reviews are nature aspects set by Department of Finance, but there are also areas that are engaged in with our trade unions and representatives. So perhaps, Jill, you maybe want to...
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the setting of a pay scale, it is done completely through a job evaluation process. So there is a process that you go through. It's not that somebody sets, the pay rate is set for the job. It's not set for an individual. An individual then will go up through a scale, assuming that they have achieved satisfactory service, but there is a process for that. Then obviously the pay award is set through on an annual basis, and that was applied to all of the pay scales. I suppose what I would say is that there definitely is a substantial piece of work that we're doing at the minute around developing a pay strategy. And that would be a very key strand of our new 5-year people strategy. And that has looked at benchmarking against other jurisdictions, other organisations, looking at where Northern Ireland Civil Service sits against others, gathering the evidence together in terms of those areas that may need looked at. That could be actually that we might have a flatter pay structure, scaling. It could be that we look at our whole employee value proposition. The one thing I would say is, though, that actually in many cases the senior civil service grades or salary points are actually certainly lower than private sector, but also other jurisdictions and some of the ALBs. But I think the key thing is that we need to gather the evidence for that, and it needs to be, so if we are going to do a whole scale review, which we are looking at, as I said, in that pay strategy, all aspects of it, including, potential gender pay gaps, etc., all of that will be wrapped up in a whole evidence-based approach with options around that. And the other thing, I suppose, just to finish off, is that we really want to as well look at a whole piece of work on the workforce model of the civil service. So I suppose essentially, how do we use our pay bill, our pay envelope? Are we the right shape and size? So that's a piece of work that's already started, but certainly a big strand of the people strategy.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that, just to orientate that to the earlier questions as well, is to make the committee aware that when Jayne spoke of that whole systems approach, that's one of the reasons why it operates under that sort of MOU and across the Executive Office and DOF, because obviously the pay strategy is critical across the service. We've heard in many committee sessions about areas that are really struggling to recruit at the moment. So a whole review of our pay strategy, our conditions, our total reward, if you will, that we offer, is just as much a part of transformation as the fund we'll talk about later, or fiscal frameworks, or budget sustainability, or capital plans. There's a whole family of change and transformation, so hopefully committee can take some reassurance that we're not just looking at that in the response to the very relevant question, but actually the more strategic one, which is how will we be able to attract the quantum and quality of civil servants that we're going to need for the type of transformation journey that we're on. Many of our civil servants now will be looking to the training and support that will be available to them to equip them for the new types of jobs that are going to come on stream as the challenges we meet.
Thank you. I'm sure you appreciate the point that I make, that if you have a minister who's got maybe a dozen people and a higher salary point to him, there's a perceived culture of who's running that department. So just something to, I would like to just
absolutely. And in some of those departments, people could have thousands of staff reporting to them, and again, as is mentioned, benchmarked against other organisations, that would not be a competitive salary in that sense. So I think you're raising the right question, which is the overall pay, salary and strategy.
Oh, absolutely, thank you. And Neil will be aware, I also sit on the Public Accounts Committee, just to declare that as well. So it was just in and around that, Jayne, just what is your role, or what do you consider is your role on holding accounting officers to account? So whenever something happens, the audit office reports on it, it comes to PAC, accounting officers come there. Do you feel there's a role there for yourself taking it forward? Because I've sort of found now in these past few months in the Public Accounts Committee, there's a lot of the same issues and the same reports, the same things coming forward that came forward almost 20 years ago whenever I used to work for the audit office. So it's just, do you see a role there for yourself within following up those recommendations?
Yes, and obviously one of the recommendations from the public accounts was the role of the head of the civil service. However, and the aspects in terms of that centralised kind of position and role of holding accounting officers to account. The current structures constitutionally rise as accounting officers are responsible to the Assembly, and they are fully accountable. They're under the direction of the ministers, and then I'm management of in terms of their performance and management areas. So I am not an accounting officer. I have no formal accounting officer role, and that speaks, I think, to the direction. I understand the limitations that come with that role, but also those are reflective of the constitutional position that was created of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, where ministers are fully responsible for their departmental areas. Anything that's cross-cutting comes through in terms of those executive responsibilities. However, it's not good enough. It's what I have to say. It's really difficult, and that's the law and the Constitution. What we have endeavoured to do, there's obviously the various responses that has been given to the PAC, but actually how do we, within the framework that we have, find a way to strengthen and provide those levers? And a key aspect, so the PAC report and the major capital report and the people strategy, capability and capacity, those are the work of the Civil Service Board. Those are the areas that we need to not just to recognise and respect the accounting officer responsibility, but to provide frameworks and support and governance. And those are the subgroups that we have now established with external scrutiny, with external jobs of work. It's not only turning up at a next board, but there are programmes of work that are driven. We're very lucky to have significantly skilled but also committed non-execs supporting that. And for example, to the people positions you referenced earlier, again, one of the recommendations in the PAC was about the capability, and we need to look externally, and we have an external panel appointed that Jill can reference for our people transformation, but also Jill's attendance to that people perspective in those projects, in the major capital projects. What actual skills do we need? Who do we need to bring into those areas? Has to be embedded, and we have to report what is our programme for work, in my view, from that board. That's the bottom down, because we need to deliver it. It needs to get better. We need to, the issues are well articulated, they're well known. We need to now find structures within the governance frameworks we have, acknowledging and giving respect to those, but find ways to move that forward.
No, and that's great to hear, because it's that sort of siloed approach, and you don't know where to go to, the same issues coming up and time again, so it's good to hear that. My final question, maybe it's more for Neil, but I'll ask it anyway. Just as we're coming to this committee, we're looking at the budget bill. We're looking at reviewing the accelerated passage, and I just wondered, do you have the figures as to how many in which departments, if we weren't to grant accelerated passage, would be online to exceed their 65% vote on account?
Know that?
You might well be passing it to someone else who doesn't know, but No, that's always very, very difficult to predict because money demands come in very different, for example, significant farm payments come at a very particular time in the year in September, so you can never quite predict exactly which department. It's not an immediate concern for us, and we believe the Royal Assent Passage time frame will avoid that being a concern, but we keep it under constant review, and we've had to deal with that before, but it's very difficult, and I always would get caught out if I made a specific prediction of when a particular department. There can be all sorts of unforeseens. The time at which you demand the cash is not as straightforward as just looking at your budget because it doesn't have a linear path, but it's not an immediate concern for the department. And if I may, just going back to your previous question, apologies, I just want to reinforce Jayne's point that although there is constitutional issues, which obviously are outside my position to comment on, there is more can be done and we are doing better. So the recent launch of the People Plan, the one-year plan, was subtly but importantly different. We had a good discussion and debate at the NICS board, but the requirements to drive forward that people agenda was taken collectively by the accounting officer group, and each of us did our own video introducing it to our own staff with a collective responsibility to drive improvement. So we'd agreed at the next board what way we would take that forward, and then those videos were launched so that each department, though of course with its own accounting officer, had agreed a set of common principles about what we were going to do on the people agenda. So we are making progress towards that collective approach.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Philip Brett is next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. So 6 months, are you glad to have ministers back, Jayne?
I am delighted to have ministers back.
Good.
I am.
TEO, Permanent Secretary, where are we with that?
We have appointed an interim Perm Secretary to that. That is very experienced David Malcolm, who I referenced just in my opening notes. And David will, in that role, take a very substantive role also in terms of reform and transformation and obviously the delivery aspects of the unit.
So that's an interim basis?
That's an interim basis. The process that we followed previously, we looked towards, I guess, innovating in terms of some of the areas. So we had modelled some of the Whitehall processes in terms of observed areas, and we had the PermSec of Scotland sitting on that board. So it was a new structure, and we obviously substantively appointed one individual to that role. That was Ian Snowden in Department for Economy. And the second candidate withdrew from that process, so we had to move to an interim process where the process is underway for the substantive appointment, but we're also taking the learnings from that process as well, and Jill and Catherine are both supporting me in terms of feeding those areas in.
I just want to follow up on the point that the Chair was making in relation to wiping of ministerial messages during and after the pandemic. So is your view that it was standard procedure for ministers to wipe WhatsApps?
My view, the guidance under a public inquiry is that there should be retention of information to anything that can support a inquiry, given so the retention policy should have been changed under the basis of the Inquiries Act, which has a legislative impact, statutory impact.
So it was standard practice for ministers to delete in line with policy, or it was against policy? It
was in line with the policy that was in in line with the special environment, which was the public inquiry, that the information should have been retained.
Okay, so I'm just reading a headline from the Belfast Telegraph here in December, where the then and current now Justice Minister, Minister Long, said that wiping WhatsApp pandemic messages was standard policy. Is that your view?
So the removal of information that shouldn't be recorded as part of the official record, if it is the official record, the guidance in the ministerial code as well as civil service is that you should put that into the official record. There was a different view in terms of what the official record was, particularly under a public inquiry where all information is relevant, and that was the relevancy of information. So the understanding of that at a departmental level, at a SARA level, was not clearly understood, and I guess there was information provided, but actually the giving effect to it, that you are now in a separate condition where normal policies may need to be set aside. That talks to the central governance perspective of actually being able to direct departments to do different things, and I guess a knowledge in the service of what the requirements were under the statutory requirements of a public inquiry, where all information should be retained.
And that was communicated to ministers and their civil servants quite quickly when a public inquiry was announced, is that right?
It was written communication to myself, I think, in my first couple of weeks in office, and then with legal advice. I think the perspective that we had, that lots of things can be communicated via written communication, was that given effect within departments, and I think that's the communication that we need to address, is how that misconnect between what should be retained in that retention policy. That's the discussions we had with Information Governance Commissioner, the Information Commissioner, and how we make sure that network, the keeping of the official record is in an area that officials own. It's in the Public Records Office, and the differentiation between the standard process and the requirement under a statutory public inquiry.
Where does the responsibility fall then for those ministers that decided to delete their messages in spite of your official communication? Does that fall with the civil servants who may allow that to happen, or does the buck stop with the minister who decided to delete their messages?
Obviously, there's advice provided to ministers in keeping the official record. There's advice provided to officials in terms of the retention of that. I think that's in where the key learnings are. There were very many different areas of advice. The definition of what was an official record, I think there was a broad understanding an official record was the areas that were used for decision making, and the specification of relevance was not defined by the public inquiry until later, in terms of it wasn't defined at the initial start of the public inquiry, but in the provisions of caution it would have been pertinent to retain all information. The official keepers of the public record are officials. We define the retention policy. We're updating the Executive Office retention policy, and that will come to the Assembly for scrutiny and to be agreed as well.
I'm still slightly confused about this.
Swing to last the question.
It does not appear to be clear to me whether wiping messages wholesale, which is what happened, including records of key ministerial decisions and executive decisions, was in line with executive policy or NICS guidance as of when the pandemic, 2020 and 2021. I'm afraid none the wiser as to whether that's the case, but perhaps in questioning that will emerge. Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much indeed for your evidence so far, Jayne and Neil and Jill. Look, a couple of things. First of all, the Northern Ireland Civil Service Code of Ethics, which governs all aspects of how you conduct your business, that's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So, first of all, I've got two questions. One here is about HR and one here is about sort of record keeping. Now, you were in front of us, Jayne, I think, when I was the chair of the committee in sort of November, December 21. And one of the things we were talking about was lessons identified, because we realised no lessons had been learned from the RHI inquiry by that stage. And it was very clear then that there were significant issues to do with record keeping and the management of records and the effective keeping of minutes and retaining of all records that went through. I think that was very clear to every single person, both in the civil service and indeed into sort of across the Northern Ireland government at the stage. And indeed, reviewing the evidence you gave at that session, you were very categoric that, you know, on your watch this would not happen. If we move on to 2022, when the Assembly at the election went down and the ministers sort of handed in all their IT and all the rest of their equipment, it's quite clear from the evidence that was given in the COVID inquiry that some of those sort of systems were wiped and were put on factory resets. But quite a few of those were put on factory resets by the civil service themselves, people you were responsible for. Could you explain how that happened?
Yes, so we were here in, I think it was November 2021, and discussing the obviously recommendations from the RHI inquiry, which were multifaceted, I think, in the analysis, and I know that Department of Finance have come back, I think 35 out of the 42 kind of recommendations. There has been substantive progress, and of course,
which is record keeping.
One of those areas was actually the use of platforms and technologies, and we discussed earlier the integration rollout of Office 365, which removes some of those areas, and actually the use of kind of where the information governance is in the Information Governance Board. There are clearly areas and further lessons we are going to learn from information and record keeping in terms of the pandemic response, which we will need to factor into the future process. I would say the areas regarding some of the notes that were kind of perceived missing, some of that is regarding what the instance is when you're in a public inquiry. So there was, we provided all minutes for executive meetings. Some people kept handwritten notes. That wasn't a consistent process. There should be a consistent process for anything that you're keeping handwritten. If you agree a formal record, there needs to be a process, in my view, that the executive agrees what is kept from a handwritten perspective. So, for example, logbooks were taken from head of the civil services and various written notes. There was one written note of a meeting that actually wasn't provided, which is unfortunate. That wasn't the official record, that was a handwritten note. In the status of the official record of the service, that wouldn't have been pertinent. Obviously, it is pertinent in the scenario where you're in a legislative public inquiry. In the standard, and to address possibly some of the chair's position, the position if a mobile phone is returned, the responsibility is on the individual to make sure the information is stored in the official record, decisions are captured. That is their responsibility to make sure that that is established, and that would have been their responsibility under the guidelines they sign up for, the ministerial code, or officials open to keep those official records. There is a definition of the official
Just to interject there quickly, it says in the evidence you give in front of the COVID inquiry that civil service IT staff themselves wiped phones and iPads. Under whose direction did they do that?
So if I perhaps can just explain that process. So it is a responsibility when devices are handed in that those official records should be stored on the official record, and that's the obligation of each of the individuals. In the scenario where there is a statutory public inquiry, the definition of what is relevant changes from just being the official record to all things being relevant. That was a decision that the inquiry made. So under that basis, the information that all information was relevant. So in my view, that was the responsibility of the senior information responsible owner, the officials, to inform and to retain and to keep to make clear that all information should be restored. I think in Departmental Finance, the standard procedure outside a public inquiry is that a device is received and it's reset, and that's in line with policy. The position here is we weren't in normal conditions, that actually there was different rules that applied.
So I'm confused again, because you came in front of us, in front of the committee, and we were talking about RHI. And one of the big issues from RHI was the retention of information and record keeping. You are responsible for the civil service. One of the most significant things that's happened to this nation in decades was COVID. You were head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service during COVID. We had a situation where phones and information was giving in, and they've been wiped. Now, somebody has, and you used the word accountable and responsible several times, somebody has to be accountable and responsible for that. Who? Please tell me, who?
So I guess to qualify what I said, individuals are responsible for giving the information in. The accountable officer is responsible for the information governance to give an effect to that. So that's the Perm Sec in each of the department. And they have the responsibility to ensure that all information is retained. That is the senior information responsible owner.
Is anybody being disciplined for that?
Obviously, we won't be commenting on terms of any specific areas of the inquiry, and those recommendations that are coming through from the inquiry, we need to give respect for them to come out with their findings, and we are engaging with the inquiry.
So just to go back, we had you in front of here to talk, this committee, to talk about RHI. One of the key things about RHI was retention of information. One of the things we talked about was the cultural change that needed to go through the civil service, in particular about record keeping and minutes and everything else. And the first time that we actually reached a point where we needed to keep minutes and keep records and the rest of it, we failed.
We did keep many minutes. There were 10,000s of documents from the Executive Office which were provided. There were the devices which came in subsequent to me taking office which were retained, which weren't reset. But I do acknowledge that there was inconsistency across that, and I do acknowledge that clear direction of accountability is not clear in our processes, because information accountability comes with the Perm Sec. The individual accountability for someone putting the official record comes with the individual. there are too many areas where things can actually, by an act of omission or by an act of purpose, you have no clear direction of who is accountable. And I know that's not a very satisfactory response.
It's not.
But that is the reality of the governance structures that are there in the place. And it probably talks towards the points that Ms Forsyth made earlier regarding that single accountability of who has that responsibility.
Okay.
But I get, from the perspective of there was much that was provided, all the minutes of the executive meeting were provided, there was much information, and Neil maybe want to talk about the processes, so within his department as well, but ultimately the need that we need a more structured approach to do this at a service level.
Yes, we're certainly looking at that, and I want to be clear, I just want to speak up on behalf of, as an accounting officer here, certainly, as Jayne has outlined, DOF has a responsibility in terms of providing hardware to departments, but each accounting officer, the information that is held on those devices, laptops, phones, whatever it might be, is the responsibility of that individual, and it's important that each one of us puts correct information onto the public record. But what I do want to say is, dealing with a lot of the staff who were under the most extraordinary pressure during COVID, the idea that we would think that we're looking for a route to say that somebody was doing something. I am responsible for the data within the accounting officer within DOF. It's my responsibility to make sure that all my team are fully trained to make sure that they store the official record. But what they were going through at that period of time, when I've trawled through the records that we've provided to the inquiry of tens of thousands of minutes of documents, I just want to put that on the record that I believe the staff have worked tirelessly to try and reach the standards of record keeping that we all aspire to. There have been a few documents missed, and that is regrettable, but there is not a sense in which there is a automatic downloading of every piece of information. The policy was clear that each individual was responsible for the data that they held on their devices. At that point in time, we were going through a world that nobody recognised. The use of devices was different to what it had been prior to that. It's a world, I wasn't here at the time, but it's a world I can only imagine, and I see some of the aftermath of it. So the idea that there was a thought process I wouldn't accept, but what I do want to be clear with you, Steve, is it is my responsibility to make sure that the Department of Finance holds the records in which the policy requires us to do so.
Thank you, Neil. I'm glad somebody has actually said I am responsible and accountable for something. Thank you for that. For those of us in this committee, and for those of us who sat in this committee before, who went through the saga of trim and went through the saga of everything else, I mean, it doesn't actually fill us with a lot of joy. But I want to move on. I just want to move on to the second issue I was going to raise, was HR, particularly HR. You'll be very aware from the COVID inquiry of the remarks from Hugh Wittes made specifically about a minister, and a minister I appointed. And when you read those minutes and you look at a senior civil servant who was trying to undermine the system of government we have, regardless of the circumstances, and particularly was trying to undermine the Health Minister, Robin Swan, who was doing a remarkably difficult job in a very difficult time. The fact that a senior civil servant could write something along those lines and not be challenged and not be disciplined. And one would ask, sorry, Chair.
I'm in the chair. I should just say it's important that we are, Mr. Wittes is not here to answer questions.
This is the public record.
You're putting your spin, as it were, and you're entitled to do that. We have to be careful. Mr. Wittes is not here to answer those questions, Steve. So I would just ask you to frame any question you are asking in a way which relates to general HR policy.
Okay. I'm quite happy to read from the record from the COVID inquiry of what he actually said. And I'm quite happy to read that into the record of where the discussion happens to be. But this question I have is that, bearing in mind that was on the record. Now, we've already ascertained that we have no details of any disciplinary activity being taken for moving of data or losing of data or raising of phones. But we do have an example here of a senior civil servant who's tried to undermine a minister and has been promoted.
I don't think it would be, I have to say, Steve, I don't think it's appropriate to ask these questions about a specific ministerial, about the actions of a specific official in that context, I'm afraid. So I can ask the officials if they want to comment in generalities, but I'm afraid this is not and I give a lot of leeway to members, but this is not the appropriate forum to pursue individual questions. I'm happy for members to do that via their own channels, unless any
I mean,
I would like to give a general response.
Like a general response, obviously not to discuss any of the specifics of those issues, but I'm very clear that the impartiality of the civil service is the core tenet of those core aspects that we deliver, and I'm very confident that my senior civil service and all civil servants. I also would say, you know, I'm new to and Neil is also new to the civil service. I have never seen individuals work harder in the public service than I have in my all days in the private sector. And whilst you've pointed out there may issues that have gone wrong and we could have done better, in the absence of a government and executive, these people stepped up, particularly in the health department in Minister Swan's position, but also across the service, and I have never found them wanting in terms of doing that. And whilst we do make mistakes, and there is right that we are publicly scrutinised, I am responsible as head of the civil service for leading that. I take that very seriously, but it is a privilege to do my role in terms of that, and I acknowledge there's areas of accountability we haven't succeeded. In this case, the area of impartiality, in my view, is very clear, but obviously we will not be discussing any specifics of any issue, Mr. Aiken.
I should just say I'm happy to expect people to be robust, and I'm robust myself, and I want this to be a free range, but I just think we have to be careful in relation to very individuals. Have you any more questions?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you all for your answers so far. Just to go back, I guess, to the run-up to this meeting, Ms Brady, obviously your role has changed compared to your predecessors in that you don't have Permanent Secretary or Accounting Officer responsibilities at TEO. I guess my first question is then, why was it necessary to seek the First and Deputy First Minister's approval to get evidence here today?
But also, just to refer, the head of civil service, I don't think ever had an accounting officer role either. There was always an accounting officer within the department, so that isn't a change to that status. But I act under the direction and control of the First and Deputy First Ministers in the same way as all officials act under the direction and control. So that's the principles of my office, and obviously I'm not here with any, I provide advice, but it is ministers who decide, and I'm here representing the First and Deputy First Minister in that regard as well.
No, that's helpful. It had been discussed previously, so I thought it was good to give an opportunity for a response to that. Just turning to record keeping very briefly, because I know it's been discussed in some depth already, and I don't want to dwell on it. But look, I first of all want to say that I accept and respect the really high pressure situation that so many officials were working in, and I am, I guess, a bit more forgiving at times that, you know, scribbling a handwritten note of a meeting that's very tense isn't always easy and isn't always perfect, and I completely give credence to that. However, there was one specific example of a meeting whereby there were 13 different versions of a minute of that meeting, and the substance of the minute was different in terms of the first draft and the final draft. And I guess my question is, given that this has been an issue in RHI and recently in the COVID inquiry, is there, in your view, a cultural issue in terms of record keeping where officials feel that they might need to protect their ministers in some circumstances?
Thank you for the question. No, that's not my view. That there is, I think, the view of impartiality, and we serve all ministers in whatever division that they come from. I think the 13 different versions talks towards the perspective of the content managers versus document storage. So our content management system, you talked about TRIM. So of those 13 different versions, 3 or 4 were created before the meeting actually started. So the metadata is stored in each different version of those aspects. So I think there was maybe 2 versions where there was material changed. The meeting minutes were abridged, and there was discussions regarding whether that was the right thing to abridge those. In my view, there was no. That was an area of different judgment in that. But actually, the 13 different versions wasn't that someone was reviewing, sending these out. This was metadata, which was storing the different variants of those systems. For me, we should not be using content management as our document storage system. That's a legacy platform. We should be using Office 365, Microsoft Word as we have. That should be stored centrally. You should be capturing meta versions of that. I think the aspects that those were found, those were shared with the inquiry, show the level of transparency of information that was provided as well in terms of that. Now, that should have been earlier and all the different things we said it to. But I also do appreciate, Mr. Tennyson, your view that, kind of recognising the efforts as well of the civil service too. I think this will, of course, factor into both the recommendations from the inquiry, but we've already started looking at the learnings and we have looked towards performance we need to address in the immediate term for those areas.
And just on the flip side, in terms of record keeping, so Obviously, impartiality is a core tenet of the civil service, but as well as that, it's important that there's internal debate and that there's innovation and creativity. Do you think that any of the focus on record keeping, as important as it is, has actually maybe stifled that internal culture of debate within departments?
I don't think so. I think there may be a view, and I came in and we've heard around this table, that inquiries have a chilling effect in terms of stifling innovation and risk-taking. And I guess that is a concern for me overall as a service, as we will always, if we move and do anything that's new, have elements where we could have done better or we should have improved or did something wrong. And those are necessary aspects of risk when you're in a different environment. And I guess my concern would be is that to always be focused on the aspects where we didn't so well, but not counterbalance to the areas where it was where we supported delivery and change, can create perhaps a feeling of inertia. And I think those are things that us as leaders need to provide the framework and platform to do that. You'll hear from the Transformation Board as well, the Interim Transformation Board. And I guess the view, is there an area that we can allow some more creativity that you talked about? Because the acknowledgement is that we have to drive things forward, we have to do things new. But I think for that there has to be a different, but within the right record keeping and of course maintaining our accounting office and governance responsibilities. Is there discussions that we need to have regarding if we're taking some innovative bets that some of these will not be successful, and understanding and communicating that to our stakeholders that actually there will be areas, because we want to move beyond the status quo, that we may need to tolerate a high level of risk and indeed failure.
If I may come in on that, I just think it's a really important question. It's one that I'll be honest, I also wrestle with, because it is incredibly important. And heaven forbid anyone has to transcribe or write down everything I say or think. That would take.
Someone's doing it right now.
Yes, my staff would be here for weeks if everything. So there is a really important and serious point that you make there, that a lot of discussion and debate must take place, argument even and disagreement as you try to find the right way forward, test out things they don't work. Those are not always in that type of meeting, but certainly good record keeping is a skill in itself, and my credit goes to those who do it so well, and there are many across the service, as to what actually is clear actions, what is a clear decision, particularly for those who have to listen to someone as like me, who can be quite verbose and talk quite a lot before getting to their point. So there is actually a really serious issue there about stifling debate. If we craft everything through would I want this recorded in this precise way, that has the risk, and it's something we're all very mindful of, and I'm very clear with my team that we still need to have those frank and open exchanges and not run a sort of truncated version of meetings for fear of describing it. And that comes down to very good record keeping and skilled people involved in that. There's been a lot of talk of AI and its potential role in helping us and assisting with record keeping, but I think it's very important to think about just how different those can read years later when you come back to scrutinise them. So a little shout out here for the quality of many of our good record keepers, who it's quite a skill indeed.
Well, that's helpful, thank you. I'm going to move on then just to the PSC's report on capacity and capability. And one of the issues that they touched on was performance management. And I appreciate, Ms. Brady, this was before your time, but at that stage the Public Accounts Committee noted that only 19 out of almost 20,000 officials had their performance rated as unsatisfactory. Now, either that's a remarkable performance by the civil service or that's completely inaccurate. Do you think that that's credible, and what steps have been taken to improve performance management within the service?
Thank you, Ms. Jonathan, and I'll make some comments, maybe Jill will come in some of the areas. You've presented on the 1 year and also the 5 year people strategy that we're developing, and that's the fundamentals is actually how we do performance management. There are systems in place, either in terms of our binary system, whether you're acceptable or you're non-acceptable. So it's a fairly nuclear kind of perceived option. In my regard with PermSec colleagues, I have moved beyond that 2 areas to actually reward where people are exceptional. And I know there's obviously the grading structure which doesn't allow you to give financial incentives towards those areas. So that's a clear direction that we need to move towards, is how we actually differentiate between those. We have had some margin improvements. We're building it in terms of that overall initial approach, but actually how we move beyond that as a mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, everybody refers to the sort of the two-box system, if you like, which definitely does give, you know, a binary. It is a difficult, and how many people were deemed to be unsatisfactory. But actually, when you look at the performance management policy that was reviewed in 2019, it does allow for considerably a lot more. And line managers in particular can give warnings at various stages for underperformance. So the whole premise of a performance management culture is actually to improve performance rather than, but I do take your point about the numbers given the size of the civil service. But there's a lot more to it than satisfactory, unsatisfactory. So there are written warnings throughout. There are targets for improvement. You can put in place improvement plans. There are toolkits for line managers. There's been training on all of this. Nevertheless, it is something that we need to give more attention to, and there has been considerable work as part of the new people strategy around this. So we've benchmarked with every other jurisdiction, benchmarked with other organisations, looked at best practice policies, and actually we've spoken to the behavioural science people, because there's actually potentially nothing wrong with the policy, but what is it that we need to do? Is back to that cultural piece. What more is it that we need to do to embed those behaviours and those policies? So that's a big piece of work. The numbers have gone up, by the way, but not I suppose as relative as you might think for 24,000 staff.
If I'd add to that, Jill's absolutely right. We talked about pay strategy earlier. One of the whole ethoses of creating a P&OD division as distinct from the operational HR area is to focus exactly on this, on more strategic reviews of our policy framework to make more substantive changes. Just a small personal remark. I think we have to think about performance review and performance management. When I come from any of the roles I've worked in before, it's odd that our asymmetry would only be, satisfactory or unsatisfactory, and I would be very strongly in my role advising to Minister that future performance managements also need to call out exceptional as much as they do areas of substandard performance. Very hard to create a culture of striving for better when all you do is focus on when you're not at the right standard. Though that is important, we need both ends of it.
Yeah.
Can I ask just one final question, Chair? It's just in relation to the point around June monitoring, and just for the record, I share the view that's been expressed that it's routine business and that it should proceed. But just if it were to proceed in the pre-election period, can you give us some insight in terms of how that would be communicated to uphold impartiality? So, for example, I'm thinking, would it be departmental allocations rather than announcements of particular policies, or how would that work in practice?
We would have to take particular concern about the guidelines around communications to be careful about that. Again, it'll partly come down to timings, etc., but there certainly is the practicality of assigning the amount and then what you do in terms of communication. So taking those two distinctly, I've been focusing rather more on making sure we get through the mechanics of what advice is required on the and then subject to whenever any meeting would be called, we would then think about what the appropriate advice to give is under the guidelines around how would you communicate. So it may not follow what would have been done in previous times because we have to be mindful of the pre-election guidance. But you're quite right to draw attention to the communication of it is distinct from the process of the executive meeting to discuss the numbers.
That's me, Chair. Thank you.
I mean, it's obviously not going to happen in June now, is it? I mean, there's not going to be an executive meeting tomorrow, is there?
I'm sure there won't be one tomorrow, but that's not to say there won't be one
on Friday or Saturday or Sunday. June ends on Sunday at midnight.
So it'd be for FM and DFM to decide in terms of agenda. I mean, it's not.
Is there still a possibility of an executive meeting on Friday?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It's not my understanding.
So it will not be June monitoring. So the idea that calling it June monitoring is a bad thing, I'm going to bring you in now, Paul, don't worry. Next is Paul Frew.
Yeah, so just to be clear on that, then if there's no executive meeting, then there'll be no June monitoring, right?
Well, it may. In aspect of that's not to say it might not happen next week. That will be for First Minister and Deputy First Minister in terms of agenda. I understand the request is there. For
it will take the meeting to make the decision.
So it requires executive approval.
Okay, with regards to the Audit Office recommendations of November 2020, 1.4 states to further enhance accountability, all senior civil service staff should have capacity and capability related objectives in their annual performance expectations, along with measurable targets. Have any of you three seen any of those measurable targets, annual performance expectations?
Yeah, I would take that. Again, and Jill will want to speak to this, bigger reform of how we might monitor performance is happening, but certainly from my perspective for the senior civil service that report into me, we have a very particular and tailored conversation each year about what those targets might be. For some, it's easy to think of quantified targets. You can think quite easily of certain mechanical tasks that are required. For others, it's rather different. It's about developing a policy under corporate objectives. So I would say it's predominantly a qualitative assessment for most of the staff at the very senior level that I have reporting, but each individual has their own set of targets agreed by their line manager. Jill, you may want to.
Yeah, no, there was a review of, we've started with senior civil service performance management framework, if you like, and so it's their PDP and PPA, and that's set out in a structure whereby you have to set out what you achieved last year against certain things that you said you were going to achieve. You have to be very clear in terms of what you're proposing to achieve the following year, and then any development requirements that you need for that. But it is split into, things that are very specific to your own job, but then there are corporate and capacity and capability type things, what you're going to do as a result of that. Now, our plan had been to roll it out further than the SCS, and we haven't done that yet. But I think we should wait until we do the full review of the performance management before we roll that out. But there was a very conscious decision that it would start with the senior civil service, and that's where it has started. And Jayne talked about the changes that she brought in, and then we followed that up from an HR perspective with putting out a template. So, for example, it is in everybody's now about records keeping. So there are areas where we put things in that are a must-do.
Okay. Obviously, it's all to do with enhanced accountability. Is there a target or measure within that about the information flow from civil service to the scrutiny committees?
That's a good question. And I'm thinking of the ones that I have reviewed or my end of year to you, and I am not aware that I have that in it, so that's I'll take that away as a suggestion.
Why I asked that question is because the RHA report, all 3 volumes of it, one of the findings was in relation to briefings linked to the Northern Ireland RHA SL1 and SL1. The Edit Committee was provided with Derry Energy Division officials with incomplete and inaccurate information about the RHA scheme, among other admissions, information not included about risks that Derry had been made aware of by Ofgem. The inquiry finds that the Edit Committee was not provided with sufficient adequate information to permit the Edit Committee to effectively discharge its scrutiny function, which I'm sure you'll all agree is a very important function in the governance setup of this country. So is there anything in that the annual performance expectations, along with measurable targets, that actually measures the information flow from the senior civil service to scrutiny committees like this one? Because we've also had failings in this committee since February. Only a couple of hours ago, my colleague Deborah Erskine had to give off wrath to the Department of Infrastructure officials because of the information flow in that committee, and it doesn't bode well for the governance of this country when scrutiny committees are treated with contempt.
Well, I'd want to respond to that. It certainly would not be my intention, and if this committee, I would apologise if there's been any delay in getting you the information that you seek. There is an extraordinary volume of information required, and we're doing our very best to meet that. But I take the point that you make very seriously, and if you'll permit me, I'll come back formally on that, because I think I'm trying to think about the best way to be able to measure that, to make sure whether we take the view of the committee as whether you feel well served on that or I do, but ultimately the material that you get, again, is my responsibility that you get it and get it in good time. So whilst I would certainly look to my officials, I would take that question very personally to me to make sure that you do get what you need when you need it, And if you do feel you're being underserved in that, I will do my very best to improve on that.
I really do thank you for that. Jane, are you?
Yes, I just want to come in as well, Mr. Free, and I guess disappointed that you feel that way. Also, and that there may be an area when I review with colleagues across departments, we look at the business plan and the people survey, but there may be areas that from a consistency approach could be looked at in the business planning process.
Yeah.
And I know we do officially call out records management. We call out that corporate objective. Specifically for this year, we've called out the one-year people strategy. So what are, and those are the areas for the next board, what are the cross-cutting things that we need to make sure that we're actually making sure everyone's focused and held accountable?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing, it is very clearly set out in the Code of Ethics about providing, transparent information to ministers, and not all of that kind of thing is set out in the Code of Ethics, and there are plans. So the Code of Ethics has been updated on an annual basis, just updated again, literally just this month, and we're planning now to make sure that is actually, there is a reminder of the Code of Ethics that goes out on every 6 months now to everybody, and it's built in to all induction programmes, it's built into senior civil service and other training and development. So I think it's that sort of reminder of what actually do we mean by that.
Just to touch on Owen's point about minute taking and about written notes to help and complement minutes. I get that you don't want to catalogue every brainstorming session, because I would be all over the place, a bit like you, Neil, with regards to you. And that's actually good and healthy that you would brainstorm like that until you come to a considered view and a collective view in an executive. So there has to be breathing space. My issue, though, is that when there is notes, and notes taking should be a skill and should account for that brainstorming. But when there are notes and they exist, the very big failures that we have had with regards to the COVID inquiry. Notes of the First Minister, the first executive meeting after the Bobby Story funeral, that went missing. 7 attempts were made to secure the minutes from the 2nd of July 2020. Now, how come then that those same minutes, those notes that were missing, all of a sudden mysteriously appeared the very day of the schedule of the modules 2C of the inquiry? Can you walk me through, Jane, what actually took place there? What you lived through whenever you found out that those minutes were, first of all, those notes were missing, and then how can you tell this committee what happened with regards to that very day that you were told that those minutes did exist?
Thank you, Mr. Free, and I guess just to acknowledge that there were issues, very significant issues, and that also, I mean, I can give you some of the framework for those areas, but also that it is in discussions that we're having with the public inquiry who need to be respected and given space to come out with their recommendations. I was aware of the missing notes when I attended the inquiry, when the KC, Claire Dobbin, spoke regarding the missing notes, and then contemporaneously was informed of the previous requests, I think on the Thursday, perhaps the Friday morning, when the KC spoke again. As you're aware, we instigated an independent inquiry led by an independent KC as part of that process. I guess maybe a couple of points of clarification. Those weren't the minutes of the meeting. So the minutes of the meeting, all the minutes of the meeting were provided when the first request was done towards the offices, and they were provided in whole. There were some which were missing. There was further requests asked for those minutes. The investigation has progressed. We've given the findings. We've passed those to the inquiry. I spoke to the inquiry yesterday regarding it. They will obviously come through with recommendations. I think in there's the consistent, you talked about, having helpful notes and minutes, is we don't have a consistent approach of, if we keep an official record of a meeting, if ministers are in a setting and we have an official record and a note and that's taken, and then there are further notes that are made of that, what status they have and what is our approach for those further written information. And again, we talked about those are then discoverable under a public inquiry setting. So that is the area that we need to explore, is where is our consistency of approach in terms of delivering that. I guess also from my analysis, in terms of the findings inquiry, is that there was no differentiation between any of the notes that were provided. It's, one of them obviously was pertinent to a specific meeting, but actually that it wasn't that they were treated any differently from other minutes of that meeting in addition.
So where were they? Where were those notes, the 7 attempts that were made by the inquiry? Where were they? Where were they sitting?
So, as I said before, we've given the report to the public inquiry, and they will make that information available. I guess it wouldn't be appropriate for me to go into the detail of those areas. They were kept in the normal standard process and procedure as well, is the view that I have received. But again, I would leave the inquiry to reflect that and publish their findings as well.
You've said a couple of times about there would be a higher threshold for a public inquiry, but that's not necessarily strictly true when you think of freedom of information requests. So when you ask for freedom of information on all documentation, those types of notes would be included within that.
Well, actually, they wouldn't be, because they are a policy under development under an executive process. So obviously ministers need to have a space to have discussions in the confines of that. So there are a number of different areas that breach the threshold above FOI. So those are anything which is politically sensitive, anything which is internationally regarded, those which are policy under development. So there are specific areas which are carved out.
Okay.
And that was that different threshold which was then made.
Okay, stand corrected. Thank you. Can I ask you then about, you commissioned an independent technical analysis of the 44 mobile devices that was handed back. How many of those 44 were ministers and how many of those were civil service?
They were all ministers.
All ministers?
Yes.
24 of those devices across the NICS is what is actually, I think, quoted in your submission to the COVID inquiry, that were not retrieved due to them being reset before either being reallocated or destroyed. Now, you say there's this conflict between that it's the policy that all of that information on those phones should have been retained, but it is and it was civil service policy, Mobile Device Security Policy Section 3, which states devices must be returned to IT Assist for secure erasure, reloading of software, re-encryption and redeployment. So has this policy been revised in light of this conflict, and what does it now read?
Yes, I guess to give you, those mobile devices included tablet devices. Maybe coming back to the advice that I provided in September along with legal advice, which referred to, we are now potentially, there's a statutory public inquiry. Their view of what is relevant information may be changed, so I advise you to retain all information and to inform your information owners to make sure those steps are in place. That was a step that wasn't in place. The normal policy is when a device is returned, of course, because we do not keep devices forever, in terms of we need to make sure that we're redeploying them and there are not security concerns, is that they would be returned and reset as per the service contract.
What happens to civil service, senior civil service, with their phones and their devices?
So the information, so all my mobile messages were provided, as were all civil service, generally across the area. So, but their process will be also, obviously, as they return, their device is given in and it will be reset and redeployed by another department, because obviously we need to make sure there's value for money in terms of our digital devices.
Was Michelle O'Neill the only one, either minister or civil service, who had actually given you back the phone with the factory reset already conducted?
I mean, I don't have the specifics of the report in terms of it, but there was a different approach across all different areas. Some were reset prior to coming in. I understand the former, so some of the other areas were reset. Some were stored and retained in the executive office, and some were sent back for factory reset. I think it is published in the report, but I don't want to mislead the committee with any particular information specifics that I'm not over the detail of.
So just so I'm clear on this, me finished here. So what actually takes place now when a minister leaves office or a senior civil service personnel changes their phone?
So there would be ensuring that everything is in the official record as per the standard process, and they would then be returned and restored. And maybe
So how does it stay? How does it go on to the official record? Electronically? Is it in a cloud? Is it in a pack, a data pack? I'm not technically minded, so excuse me.
No,
for my
it's for the individual to, through their exchange, to then download, record in whatever way they determine appropriate. But it's their responsibility to make sure the official record is recorded. When the devices are returned, they will be recycled and sent out to the system.
They could actually very easily, no matter who it is, they could very easily disguise or not disclose certain emails or certain WhatsApp messages.
Well, emails would be on the email servers, but WhatsApp messages, you would be correct in that. And of course, I suppose, thinking ahead, were you to institute a policy that was different in that, in which each phone was to be retained, we'd obviously have questions about value for money there, but even if that were to be the case, one might imagine or suppose what would happen then to how you would have conversations. So the question is, what would we be seeking to gain here? We're also looking to make sure that we improve, Jayne's mentioned earlier, a better records management system. We're currently adding something like 1 million records a month to Content Manager. It's becoming increasingly slow. Speaking to other jurisdictions, they're shocked about how much we do put on the official record. They would have a lot less. So there's something there as well about what we think about as an appropriate way of storing. It's not the data space anymore, but it's making it an intelligible record that you can search and interrogate later. But you do draw, and there is an important point here as to making that judgment. There is a level of, when you, particularly when in senior civil service position, at which that level of seniority puts an onus on you to be able to determine what is appropriate for the public record. And there is at present an element of judgment in that when you review your own messages. Does someone consider a time of a meeting or a delay to a meeting public record or not? And each of us, including myself, make a judgment on that. We are reviewing policies, we will look at that, but we always have to think about what we're trying to get out of that at the outcome to get the right form of the official record. But to answer your question formally, yes, we still have the current policy in place that when returned to us, they are just devices for redeployment. The information is the responsibility of the person who put the information on the device.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Really hard.
Yeah, thanks very much for your answers so far. Just a couple of areas I want to cover. Firstly, the Civil Service Board, and it feeds into, I suppose, conversations that are happening at an executive level, but through all the scrutiny committees as well, in terms of obviously the pressure on our public services, and really what sits below that in terms of inequality and exclusion, and those hardest to reach within our societies as well, in terms of social and economic inequalities. So the Civil Service Board, I mean, I think it's good that it has non-executive members now. I think that breathes a bit of fresh air and kind of external approach and thinking to it. It's good that you've appointed somebody from our universities in terms of science and technology. My big area is around, I suppose, the rest of civil society, in making sure that it's actually reflective of society out there, and particularly those that are most vulnerable when you look at poverty and inequality rates. So trade unions, the third sector in terms of our voluntary and community sector. So what more is going to be done in terms of those that would have that direct experience, in terms of tackling those social and economic inequalities that are becoming more entrenched. And it's really just a question around all of that. And the big area for me is just even in terms of what we're doing. I mean, I know there is talk in terms of prosperity and raising that. Jayne, you touched on in terms of the people, planet and prosperity piece. So just a bit of certainty around the inclusive growth part of that, in terms of ensuring we're not just running with the kind of trickle-down economics and a rising tide will lift all boats, because that's not the case. And clearly our pressure on public services is showing that that's not the case. So, you know, what work is being done as part of that broader strategy to address inequality, to look at a more plural economy where there's greater community ownership of these things. And I think the Civil Service Board could potentially be a good start in terms of having more scrutiny and oversight, and just making sure that it's more reflective of the communities out there. The other point then follows on from that in terms of the civil service and employment within the civil service. So how do we, or what more work can we do to ensure that the civil service is seen as an employer for choice? As you say, you know, you're trying to attract more people into it. Obviously making sure it's an attractive proposition is going to be critical to that. But again, I suppose one of the big areas for me is the level of agency staff, particularly in certain front-facing departments like DFC. And, you know, whilst there's big recruitment numbers, agency staff, then there's issues in terms of, I suppose, their quality of life. You know, if they're working in agency for 6 and 7 years, that's not temporary. So what are we doing to try and to look at that in order to make it a more viable proposition and an employer of choice? And what more are we doing around the broader inclusion piece being driven from the centre? I know there was recently in a recruitment campaign in DFC, and I suppose it was for 2,000 AOs, and there was over 6,000 applications. So on one hand, it does show the interest. And I know there was a pilot, I think, that was run in terms of that being an online process. So trying to streamline it as much as possible, trying to speed it up to ensure that we can get people into work and employed in terms of doing, you know, the business delivery for those departments. But I know there were some initial teething issues with that process. I mean, it was a pilot. But I suppose what are we doing to ensure, I suppose with the emergence of artificial intelligence and all of that as well, to make sure those systems are robust. But on the other hand, to make sure that it doesn't exclude those that are already excluded within society, so women, those with disabilities, or minority ethnic community, or working class communities. So again, what are we doing around that inclusion piece? And then the other bit was just around structure and kind of...
Take them one or just...
I'll throw them and then they can round up.
Okay.
Sure. Rounding up. Kind of
they all get answered. So make sure they all get answered.
The other bit then was just around structure and cross-departmental working. And I've been sitting on a couple of different committees, and it's consistently coming up that we're still too siloed in our approach. So when we're looking at transformation, there's obviously the transformation bids that are coming forward. And in other scrutiny committees, you know, we've been trying to push, certainly I know other members have, to ensure that it's meaningful transformation bids, that departments are working more organically together. So what can we do in terms of looking at the structure going forward that encourages that a lot more? You know, can we create cross-departmental teams, for example, working on certain strands of work? Can they start to, you know, work in some of even the regional hubs, that they're working a lot more collectively together, and particularly in terms of addressing those areas of inequality and stuff as well. So that's just kind of 4 broad areas. Thanks.
View your sponsorship form there, and I fill it in now. There.
What for the
sponsorship for Speak.
Maybe I'll bring a few, and then Jill will come in on terms of perhaps some of our agency and the Job Start programmes. I guess firstly to recognise, and I think the work that with the President from Executive, that, you know, we need to service all the people in Northern Ireland, and those are kind of the Section 75 groups, and as well as, you know, the business and community sector. So the information that we provided in terms of our data and evidence will cover those Section 75. Will also cover the regional balance. So we will see actually levels of deprivation by region, who is affected the most, you know, women in employment, and even in terms of the productivity areas and the economic inactivity across the services. And you're right that many of those have indicated that actually the levels, you know, are poorer health outcomes. 20%, I understand, is from your health determination. 80% is from the other factors, many of them social deprivation, comorbidities as part of that. So there's a broader perspective that we need to look at, but that needs to start with a data-informed approach. The next 4, we've got the first level structures in place. We appointed 3 perm secs, but that's not to say that is the continuation of that. But what we were really clear on, and we worked with in terms of engagement in the preparation for executive, was actually the need to do that stakeholder engagement. So we engaged very substantively with the trade unions, with the community sector, with the chief executives firm to understand their views. And I would anticipate, subject to a programme for government being agreed and going to consultation, that will form a very significant area of how we engage with those sectors and how they can be part of that co-design and engagement perspective, which we'll then look.
Yeah. Sorry, it was just to clarify, because it's where some of those have a seat at the table of the Civil Service Board, because for me the non-executive members seem very much private sector focused, and I know you're saying there are certain expertise and specialisms there, but there's also some who were involved, well, the companies, not them individually, but the companies involved in the financial crash in 2008. So it's just making sure in terms of that oversight, accountability, when you're looking at outcomes at the other end in terms of all the programmes of work and transformation that we need to do, it's that leadership and cultural piece and drive at the top, that if there's a huge section of our society that aren't there, and you touched on earlier, did step up during the COVID pandemic, were the front face working with a brilliant team of civil servants. I mean, I witnessed that myself. It's just in terms of that they shouldn't just be consulted with or engaged. It's how they have a seat at the table with those other sectors as well. Absolutely. So it's that cultural shift for me at that level. I would be keen. You might not have it now, but is there work being done to try and address it at that senior level?
Yeah, so I understand absolutely that around every board table it should be reflective of the society and the communities. To give you assurance, two of them come from a private sector, one is a public sector person kind of who has looked towards the overall reform. But you're right that we need to engage in how we ensure that we are having all the voices. I would say youth voices as well in terms of and the appointment process for our perm secs. Actually, I had more junior officials attending that process as well to make sure that we were having that reflective. So I will take that on board and we'll come back. We have to come to the committee on that basis. You talked about, I guess, that cross-departmental working, and we talked about the work of the board and the work packages. Programme for Government will instil that because actually those areas are required of it. Reform and transformation will be kind of key aspects of that, as well as that delivery unit of held to account. I think a really good example is, I guess, that the things you can put in process and paper, and you have cross-departmental working groups, but actually, example, the Department of Finance and DARE sharing actual physical offices, and that mixing in the coffee. Well, I don't think there is any coffee rooms anymore, but mixing in the stairways. I guess it changes the culture and changes those ways of working. And I've noted ministers going out now with other ministers from departments to make joint collective positions. I think the interim transformation fund may have a really important role there because it'll allow a space with meaningful investment potentially to do different things in a different environment. So that, and I think some of those is actually creating an area where you can do things differently, but also provide different ways of working. And I'm not sure that all our interdepartmental working groups are as effective as they may be in terms of delivering that dynamism and new.
I was going to ask, sorry, just on that one, particularly with the interim transformation bids, will that be an area of scrutiny, to kind of look at that and try and work out, is it real cross-departmental working in terms of the outcomes that you want to achieve, so that you can measure if it's an effective way of doing things or not?
And I know that Aidan will be and Tony will be discussing that, but the factors that are scope for consideration is it cross-departmental, and also then is it scalable, because we want things that if it has applicability in one department as a pilot, how can it be scaled across departmental is one of those factors. I think regarding the pathways to jobs, we have made kind of movement under the leadership of Department of Finance and leadership in particular in terms of that graduate recruitment, some of the work placements, but also the job start schemes and the pilots delivering those areas, and providing guaranteed interview schemes to those people with disabilities, alternative academies that have been run as well. And I know that there was obviously issues with the technical pilot, and I guess that's in the nature of doing pilots. Things cannot always go as straightforward as you want, but maybe, Jill, if you wanted to follow on that.
Yeah, Jill, I might, because I know the HR matters around the practicalities of that particular campaign, which was run out of HR. Yeah, we have learned some valuable lessons in that, but we managed to get through viewing 3,000 applications online in a week instead of over 12 weeks, so real progress. But we're continuing to work very closely with TUS colleagues to make sure the good news is more campaigns are coming. So any lessons that we can learn to make sure that people get the right, we've made sure it's at the highest accessibility standards, make sure that it's software that's used elsewhere to meet the very highest standards in terms of being easy to use, good guidance, but as always in a new way of doing things, we're doing our best to learn the lessons from it. The other bit I wanted to say by intro to Jill is two things. Cross-departmental working, that's been something that really sits with me, a few years into the job. How difficult it is to do, partly because of the logistics and the timing. The diaries of people are so extraordinarily difficult that sometimes it's not a lack of willingness to do it, it's that just managing the department's business is time enough. But what I would say is very strong encouragement, certainly from my minister and across the piece, have been very receptive to civil servants providing advice across departments. So there's a number of issues we're working on at the moment where we're intending to give a piece of advice to ministers in different departments, and even where that advice might say that Department X recommends option A and Department, there may not be consistency in our official advice because there may be different perspectives, but it doesn't mean that we should repeat the exercise 4 times. So we are working on doing better at that, and we're getting strong encouragement politically to do so. It's quite clear the scale of the challenges we face are increasingly becoming very hard to put into a single department. So that's a necessity of the changing world, that we're going to have to get better at doing that. And then being a reflective service of those that we serve is something that we do take very seriously, and I know Jill will want to speak. It's a very subject very close to your heart, as well as part of the role to try and drive the agenda of trying to broaden the service and the people that we serve.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, thank you for the question, and I suppose I would just echo what Jayne said at the very start. Much done and much more to do, and I think that is where the recent review of HR has really helped, in that we've got one section of HR that is really trying to drive that sort of high volume improvement to service delivery, speed things up and get the high volume. And then you have the other arm, if you like, that's looking very much at designing the interventions, where and you need both, because you need the scale, but you also need to really design how, not every campaign will get to those who are furthest removed from the labour market, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. So in terms of setting, in terms of opening up the civil service, but also targeting. So the graduate is one thing, but there are also graduate management programme, which is new, relatively new, and then we are looking at placements and employability programmes for looked after young people. And also looking at, we've set up an essential skills programme for existing staff who maybe don't have any numeracy, literacy or any digital skills. Jayne mentioned the Job Start, and so there are various employability programmes like that, particularly around disability, and looked after children will be coming. The stats sort of speak for themselves. We aren't fully representative. We still have more work to do, but we have gone from, in terms of females in the SCS, we were 11% in 2000 and now we're 45%. So, the interventions are working, but we still have a way to go with disability and other areas.
One of the areas, it was just to pick out because it was on Channel 4 about a month ago, particularly on social class, which I know isn't under the Section 75 groups, but I know like the creative industries, it was a piece of research Channel 4 done, and 8% of the creative industries come from working class backgrounds, over 60% come from middle and upper class backgrounds, and that shows you the issue. I remember a presentation in the Housing Executive a few years ago looking at apprenticeships. And again, you can track that in terms of the higher end apprenticeships, the predominantly male from higher backgrounds, class backgrounds, compared to kind of health and social care, which was predominantly female and in working class. And if you then track that across inequality and poverty, you can start to see the trends and the traction. So it's just making sure that we're looking at it that way.
No, absolutely.
Vertical and horizontally then across. So.
And we have just got agreement from our Minister on a new civil service apprenticeship policy, and then the next step will be to make sure and to be very clear that links with the sort of the good jobs, good work agenda, and that those apprenticeships aren't, I know there's been a report that showed, particularly in terms of gender as well, the way the apprenticeships go. So looking at more apprenticeships and looking at better data as well, just in terms of really deep diving in and saying what, it's a good scheme, but what's the impact actually been? So it's the same with the sort of the Job Start and all of that.
And there's a really strong agenda needed, and I've said it before at this committee, about restating this as a sort of a career of choice. I've said many times on record that one of my aspirations of joining the service was that when we put up those charts about the future of this place and what are our key clusters and our key strengths, why shouldn't our public service be right at the front and centre of that? It's very much the case in a New Zealand, in a Sweden, a Finland, we should have that as a strong aspiration for all our young people. We're doing a new A to Z of careers in the service so that people can see that there's a whole range of there's almost no job you can think of that we don't have within the public sector family, but we're rarely spoken about as loudly as I think we should be as a potential career. So that's work for us to do in telling our story and getting out into different recruitment areas and recruitment arenas and different methods of recruiting. But we really have to be not talking down our public sector size of it or the existence of it, but actually having it as a key plank in the type of society that we're trying to deliver.
And maybe just one further comment on your broader perspective in terms of bridging between those furthest from kind of skills market, and I have a role in terms of, as part of our people management strategy, looking towards the dev sets and where we strategically place those, and again, we've strategically moved those from perhaps Department of Communities who've got that experience of those sectors into the area and skills within economy. So we're actually building the capability and knowledge of that sectoral area that we can do that at an official level and purposely, not just transferring individuals for career development, but actually strategically where we need to provide that augmentation of skills to make sure we're delivering to address the broader kind of direction that ministers want us to achieve.
Thank you.
Okay, well look, having I know I'm going over Nicola now, don't worry, keep me right as always. I was just going to say, having campaigned myself and corresponded with Jill on an idea that we had for the Make Change programme, getting school leavers and graduates in, I'm really delighted there's been progress in that, and holding the civil service, including civil service leaders, robustly to account is in no way to undermine the civil service. In fact, it's to stress its importance. Nicola Brogan, thank you for being patient, Nicola. And a challenge that I'm sure civil servants have in meetings. We're just waiting Nicola to...
There we go.
Yes, there we go. Go on ahead.
This is actually going to be cut off in about a minute's time. The joys of technology and tight budgets, I believe. But I think we might just have to start again in a minute or two. But thank you, Jane and Neil and Jill, for attending here and for providing your briefing. So I just want to first of all comment on the June monitoring round piece. I suppose I'm slightly surprised some seem content with a delay.
Oh, you cannot make us up. Right, Jane, give us more money. We need this.
I think it'll be a case of can I suggest? I think Nicola will come back in a minute. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I had one additional question. We'll bring Nicola back in as soon as she comes on. But I did just want to ask, just as a point of information. And in fact, I don't even need to. Nicola can speak for herself.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you for that. Sorry about that. There's just the worst timing. Yes, so what I was saying was about the June monitoring round and the delay in progressing the June monitoring. Like, we know all our departments are really struggling financially, and there's been huge pressures on their budgets. So to me, getting money out to the departments as quickly as possible is really, really important. And we know some of the projects that have been proposed, I suppose, that money should be going to are really important. The likes of the really welcome announcement this week from the Education Minister about the pay and grading review for our school support staff. We know how important they are to the whole sector and to the educational workforce. So I suppose if maybe I can ask you how important do you think it is that we have the June monitoring round for that there to provide, I suppose, a certain level of certainty now that the negotiations are open in regards to the pay and grading review?
Anybody want to take Neil, I suppose, first?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Nicola. I think we've largely covered to the extent that, we've certainly provided the advice. It'll be for the executive to decide when that is held. But you do raise the very important point that it's quite very pressured across all departments, and all are seeking clarity as soon as they can possibly get it. So nothing further to add.
Yeah. Okay, and just on that one topic as well, if it were to go through before or for the June monitoring round, or previously had the plan been that the Finance Minister would be able to bring an oral statement to the Assembly to give our MLAs an opportunity to actually ask questions about the allocations and where they were going and for what reasons and that, and would that still be the plan?
Well, certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we need to be very mindful of the communication guidelines, and it really depends now, and I think it would be unwise to speculate now that we're so close to end of June as to exactly how best that would be handled. But yes, it remains the case that the executive would sit, meet and discuss and determine whether on the recommendations brought forward. But I can come back more formally in terms of how that would be communicated once we know exactly what's going to happen.
Okay, fair enough. Listen, Deirdre has covered most of what I want to ask about the reform of the civil service. The only other thing was about, that was part of the PAC report, was about the number of unfilled or the vacancies within the civil service. Can you give me an update on that and where the numbers are at the moment, and what you're doing to reduce the number of vacancies?
I'll hand over to Jill in a second, but I must say part of the responsibility for the vacancies very much rests with me. In the decisions that had to be taken in absence of an executive. A lot of that was to try and ensure really tight budget control, and unfortunately that meant a significant postponement of campaigns, and we're only beginning to catch up now in terms of getting supply on stream, coupled with the fact that we now have a very significant budget constraint, meaning that departments are now having to look very carefully at those vacancies that exist in the system. I don't know, I don't have the updated figures as to the latest count. I don't know if you do to hand, Jill, but 3.
No, I don't have the updated figures, but I suppose just to give you assurance around, again, it's the sort of the two sides of the house, if you like, that's happening, in that we're trying very hard to work with the departments and the heads of profession to do things like to design apprenticeship schemes and make sure that they're prioritised in terms of the timings for that, in terms of apprenticeship starting and things. And then separately, but completely linked, is Catherine Shannon, my colleague, and her team. They are working with the departments in terms of which one of their vacancies, given the financial situation that we're in, how can they prioritise those? And I know also that there's planning well underway and discussions with trade unions around the high volume campaigns. So we're sort of coming at it from different angles, but we could, I'm sure, give you an update on the numbers. But Neil's right, it's been very much dictated by having to cut our cloth accordingly in terms of vacancies.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Thank you for that, Jill. And I suppose maybe the next time you're in committee, you can update us with those figures. But that's great. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. You've been very patient. There's a couple of final questions for me. One is on the just on confirmed facts in terms of June monitoring or July monitoring, as it may be. There is nothing stopping a monitoring round happening via written statement on Friday the 5th of July. I don't think there's anything in legislation, is there, that would stop that happening?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't want to speak out of turn, so I will, if you're willing, I'll correspond later.
Okay.
In writing, just to be sure.
So that would be.
I don't want to speak out of turn and mislead the committee.
So you can let us know if that's incorrect.
There is a burden then of responsibility to inform the committees.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
7 days, and then also the finance minister has to make a statement to the House.
Yeah, just
sure. Well, but the monitoring round can still happen even if there isn't an oral statement to the House. Okay. I think that's important to say. Obviously, in an ideal world, there is one, but obviously we're in a pre-election period, and that has consequences too. But it's not a decision for me. I'm not in the executive, nor do I have that influence. On the transformation fund, the Public Sector Transformation Board, I did just want to cover briefly. We have very patient officials outside who are waiting to give evidence to the Public Sector Transformation Board. So, we were slightly disappointed, I have to say, in this committee to have to kind of slightly winkle the information out, and this is, I think, goes back to what Paul Frew was talking about earlier on. I think your officials are working hard, and I don't think we would dispute that, but sometimes our view would be that we're have to slightly chase to get information, and there may not be, I wouldn't imply or suggest there's any malign reason for that. As an ex-civil servant, I know very often these things are not done out of any ill will. Sometimes they are, but I don't think on this occasion. But we hadn't been told about the Interim Public Sector Transformation Board, but we have the chair of the Interim Public Sector Transformation Board in front of us. How transformational do you think it's actually going to be? Do you think £235 million is actually could actually be a transformational amount of money? And is there a risk that this is simply these people will end up bidding for projects which
may be transformational in a narrow sense, may be useful, they may simplify our IT process, but they aren't transformational in the sense that they radically improve services. So are you convinced it's going to be genuinely transformational?
The quantum, 237 million,
Is
it's obviously, the bids that have come in that were referenced, the scale of the challenges that we have, it will not transform our health or education service in terms of that scale. However, it is a ring-fence funding for looking towards those areas that we do need to improve. There are a number of different areas that have been identified. Those areas of kind of fiscal sustainability, and I'd say, and obviously I think there's been 43 applications put into this process to start with, but even the actual mindset of thinking about transformation, and that should be all of our job of work as civil servants, is thinking how can we make things better. But often when you're faced with another crisis in the situation, it's about keeping the show on the road in those areas. So even though some of the projects may be not in the stratospheric changing the world area, they can provide some very significant transformation at a fiscal level. Other areas look towards that productivity, and other areas look towards that early intervention, so things that we can actually do to get in advance of those areas. Obviously there's things like multidisciplinary teams, which have been proven are a core aspect of stemming the issues within our health service, dealing with the justice provision and the areas in terms of waiting list and early intervention, those two areas. It allows that space to provide some early interventions. I guess it's the sum, and I've been engaging with the Whitehall and the UK government, and they delivered their reform, and also the Irish governments and the different vehicles they have. Some of the areas I would say in digital actually could be quite boring and everything else, but actually could provide a fundamental shift in transformation. And looking towards our economy, where we're setting ourselves as a digital economy enabled, the message of the civil service is leading those areas. There is real advantage, I think, in Northern Ireland, because we're not at the forefront of transformation, so it's been done in many different regions. We look towards where Estonia has led in terms of its digital aspects, and those are fairly well-known aspects that can actually deliver some level of transformation. For me, and I guess we'll look through those applications, we'll be clear that they have to be not business as usual. They do not have to be funding the same things. They do not have to be displacement. So that will be the bar of those areas, and officials will define what those types of criteria are within there to give us those levels of comfort. But if we do the business as usual, if this is displacement funding and we get it from this area, I think that will be a disservice to the actual aspects of the fund. I think there'll be changes culturally. Cross-departmental working, there'll be areas where we can nudge different behaviours, and also we have engagements with some of the other funders externally, the International Fund for Ireland, the Peace Plus funding. There's a vehicle that we can use those type of funds to lever other funders which are up for doing levels of transformation. The Shared Ireland Fund is potentially Peace Plus again. Those areas of transformation are fully aligned, but often they're outside the policy construct of the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Where we have little funding, we need to make sure that we're multiplying all those actors.
Just in terms of the transparency and accountability of this organisation. So the board is there. You're a board. You're not an independent board by definition. You're the head of the civil service delivering it. There's a representative from the NIO, which is the UK government representative. Frances Ruan, very esteemed person, but she is also a member of the NICS board, so not wholly independent in that sense. Would it be worthwhile giving the Fiscal Council some responsibility, potentially in the statute that's coming forward? I know the Public Sector Transformation Board is not itself on a statutory basis, but would it be worth giving them the power or the role to monitor the effectiveness or otherwise of particular transformation projects and bids?
Yeah, and Chair, you referenced that there's an interim transformation board, and all board members would reflect that's interim. And actually, you're right, we have been moving rapidly and with agility as an executive is up and running. The structures will not be agreed until we have the terms of reference, which with the general election will be for whatever the incoming government is to agree that from a UK government and Treasury perspective. So this is the interim provision, and there will be different options that we need to look at. The level of some of these projects are based on innovation, so there's very likely external expertise that we will need to pull on. Indeed, as part of the reform and transformation unit and division, there will be fiscal expertise we'll need to pull on. There'll be digital expertise, there'll be scientific, there will be reform of some of our key services and how we do that. So there is a view, in my perspective, of how we get those external expertise. We have been working governments in the UK, governments in the South. We're looking also, again, as part of the capability aspect, how we provide more structured secondments. So those options are certainly areas that we would want to explore. We work very closely with the Fiscal Council.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion, and I think the key word here is interim. You may, and committee members may be worried about the real urgency around this, and it was certainly something the Minister was very keen to push, which was we don't yet have any clarity that Treasury would allow us to reprofile any of the money, the 47 that's allocated this year. And therefore, before the UK election was cut, we didn't want to miss any opportunity, so we wanted to be ready for June monitoring. Sorry to bring that up again. But we, although circumstances obviously changed with the UK election being called, we still wanted to show that we'd made good progress. And speaking as an accounting officer, one thing that's been really rewarding to me, Chair, is even the process within the Department of Finance and asking my colleagues to put forward bids to me to advise our Minister which ones would go forward from DOF was actually a really revealing process with a number of fairly small cost projects and people beginning to think a little bit differently. So I'm thinking of it partly as a proof of concept type model where we could look at smaller things that might be scalable, but then also the more profound transformation. But it really did make me feel a little bit disappointed in myself that I hadn't asked for that type of bid and approach from my own colleagues previous to this. So there's quite a good lesson for me that even with this urgency, we've brought forward a number of good ideas. But the key thing is interim. So there'll be a time for the board to consider the executive to see what comes forward and see what type of fuller board might be needed in terms of reference. And I absolutely apologise on the lack of speed of getting things. It's operating in a very complicated space across two departments, making sure we move at the pace required. So I will, on behalf of my officials who'll be here later, although of course they're speaking slightly differently from me in this context, I'll apologise on their behalf that we've been a little bit slow.
Obviously the ultimate decisions are made by the executive, the finance minister in the first instance. We're providing advice and input into that from an official perspective.
We thought it was important to take that out of the normal PSD process, so we look at bids all the time, but we thought it was important to have a step outside of that for something that was rather different, and that's why we set up the structures in the way that we did.
Now, and obviously we hope it doesn't undercut devolution, because obviously this is now the UK government are having an implied role in some of this stuff, and I think that's something that we as a committee will want to keep abreast of, given Julie Harrison's involvement in this. That is a very senior UK civil servant inserting themselves into devolved processes, and understanding that came out of the executive restoration package, but I personally would register a degree of caution and just an asterisk next to that. Final one for me, I promise, is on the question of something I've been digging around, which is this word which has cropped up a couple of times, including I think today, which is reshuffle. Why are we still in a situation where, in the context of open, transparent competition for senior civil service roles, are we still in a situation where people are reshuffled from one permanent secretary role to another, and is that an acceptable or desirable position to be in?
So the position for perm secs as other general service officials, those are general grades, and the appointment and position of those is up for myself as head of the civil service to do that. So we're not recruiting into a specific role within departments. There has been, and analysis I know has been provided by Department of Finance, with a more ageing senior serval on perm sec appointment, there has been significant retirements, of which we've seen as part of that in those areas, and then obviously those need to be replaced and accommodated, and we need to fulfil the position beyond them. My view is that actually the role of reshuffling, putting those individuals, so for example, Department of Health, we had a perm sec in there for 6 years plus during the pandemic. There's looking towards in a new minister and a new role coming into those areas, where is the right area to appoint those skill sets. So I want to give reassurance that they're done with discussions with permanent sec, but also very meaningfully in terms of gauging where the skill sets are that we need to put in place, as well as a career development opportunity.
I mean, you did mention the permanent secretary of health, who I think the individual you're talking about, and I don't think I'm breaking anything, any propriety rules, that this individual was then the permanent secretary of the Department of Justice and is now the chief executive of the Education Authority. So that is a rather large breadth of policy and public service delivery expertise, and clearly that is a very experienced public servant. I don't think anyone would doubt that. But one of the findings of the RHI inquiry was an emphasis on greater openness and transparency and open competition, and also, where necessary, some degree of specialisation, recognising that public sector leadership is in itself a specialism, even whatever the policy area. I do think there's something there to be looked at, because it does feel, and I appreciate that there are limitations that you're operating within, it does feel, and I'm sure this is a stress that you have to deal with, particularly Jill and others have to plan for these things, that we're fishing from a very, very small pond, and so I hope that, and of course you're an outsider who came in and are having to deal with all those challenges, but I do think that's something to be refreshed.
The Perm Sec recruitment process that we put underway last year, which we talked of earlier, was a new way of doing that process, which looked towards opening up. All our appointments are open by default across the civil service position, and of course we have then professional expertise in terms of head of finance, head of economics as well, where we provide those career pathways. Yeah. I talked earlier about the other levels in senior civil service, about augmenting skill sets from within departments positively into other departments where there is a need to have those areas, and for example, for our grade 3 cohort, of which I manage, as they all have talent biographies, so I work with them, I meet with them yearly. They go through where is their skill set, where the policy domain, where the delivery domain, where is their aspirations in terms of those areas, and we go through at a Perm Sec level to say, okay, these are the strategic areas that we need to address within the Northern Ireland in terms of actually addressing economic inactivity, in terms of our skills provision. How do we augment those at a strategic level and put the right people in the right role doing the right job? So I want to give reassurance, whilst of course if there is a broader cohort you have more options that are available, but it's done in a very purposeful perspective in line with our policies, and indeed entering new areas where we're working on the talent biography and a career development. I think also a key area that I would like to see, and Jill has been working on, is we removed the moratorium on secondments shortly after I came in post. But actually secondments are extremely useful in my view, and I know bringing even individuals externally into the civil service to bring their skill set in, even if they're here for 2 or 3 years in terms of that specific domain. So I think there's a view that you have a job for life in your department, and for some very specialist areas such as veterinary, that's a real key skill set, but actually having a diversity of review and a different way and different thinking has a value in itself, in my view. I think we should have more secondments from UK government, from Irish government, from our ALBs, and that should be a more joined up, but a structured approach and not in an ad hoc. And I think that's the area that we need to find better frameworks to do that, and Jill is leading in some of those areas.
I completely agree, and I should say both Jayne and Neil are outsiders, so obviously we don't want to completely dissuade you from persuading former colleagues and friends of joining the Northern Ireland Civil Service. But I would just say, in terms of internal secondments, I actually happen to have one I made earlier, which is a written answer on inward secondments from both the UK Home Civil Service and the ROI Civil Service. There's 0 from the Irish Civil Service in the last 5 years, and there's 15 from the UK Civil Service. So I think there's work there to do, but I'm glad that you want to do it.
And we are working on a process that is well developed in that regard.
Yeah, so there is an intergovernmental working group that's looking at precisely this, both in terms of people in and people out as well, and also, so not just roles in place, but also job shadowing and placements as well. There are actually 60 people who have been seconded into the civil service and 122 out at end of April this year. So I don't know if those numbers have changed, but certainly we are ready. There are a lot of a couple of the other jurisdictions have issues around their workforce numbers, in that they're on a reduction. So they're not as ready to go as we are, but we are actually having a meeting on this tomorrow. Happy to update the committee on that, but it's a piece of work that's well in train. And Jayne's 100% right around it's not, I don't think the term reshuffling is correct. We do have an actual policy of employee mobility in the SCS, and it is very structured and very considered.
Well,
I guess also just to give reassurance that I engage with the ministers They don't direct me in terms of doing that, but in terms of, you know, the impact between departments and also with ministers with if there has been, to make sure that that is being progressed in the best.
Well, look, I think we've covered a lot today. We appreciate you giving us a significant amount of time. That was that way it is, and we also appreciate that it's quite warm unusually in this part of the world, and so that probably doesn't make the experience any more fun for all of you. So thank you. Just a couple. We would obviously be keen to be kept abreast, particularly in developments around record keeping and those post RHI improvements as they continue to be iterated, and the update reports, and also progress more generally on next reform. Glad that you were able to be here, and obviously we look forward to taking evidence from you again in the future. So thank you very much, Jill, Jayne and Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Highlighting again the agreement, if there's a number of issues they said they'd come back on, so it's just a couple I would if we do it now.
Yeah. Okay.
Just
thank you.
If I can, there's a couple of other things that were mentioned that if we can get members' agreement to follow up on. There was mention of a pay strategy being developed using a benchmarking exercise that was evidence-based. And if members are in agreement, we'll seek to have sight of that, because it sounded quite complex.
Yes.
Also, there is a new apprenticeship policy. I don't think we've had full sight of, not necessarily recently, and if members are content, we'll seek an update on that, because that sounds like a fairly new and active thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
If members are agreed. Thank you.
Yes, that would be helpful.
And then there's a number of things that the officials have already promised we follow up.
Converting the guidance into policy, I think, is an important thing that we need to be kept abreast of. Okay, but that was okay, Stevie.
Just a very quick one.
Thank you.
They kept on mentioning sort of new policies on retention of data and all those things. I don't think we've actually seen those, have we?
I think it would be helpful if we. I think my understanding of what was being said, and it was not clear. I have to say, and what was a generally very useful, very useful evidence session. It was not completely clear to me whether that policy was being updated, or whether it was being changed from guidance into policy, and whether it was being the way it was presented was being changed. We'll ask for that update. Okay.
Sorry, just a quick one, Chair, just to add to that. Just can we ask who is actually accountable and responsible for this? Because it was good that sort of head of the Permanent Secretary Department of Finance said, I'm responsible for his bit, but we didn't get who's actually responsible for the... Yeah.
Dan and Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And just on that, as Steve said, it'd be good to have sight of the policy, what it means, but also I think it would be useful to ask, do they plan going forward on like auditing it every year or something? Because obviously all of the confusion is what has gone on in the past, and we can talk it out and have more and more confusion, but actually going forward, if we get a copy of the policy and say to them, right, well, going forward, are you going to do spot checks, are you going to audit it every year, what's the plan, so we don't sit and wait until there's another inquiry and crisis and then be looking at the same again.
Indeed. Paul, you were going to...
Yeah, just to say, just to inform or just add to the bones of that. So you have this gathering of information and how that's collated, but then you also have other policies like the mobile device security policy, which sort of was contradictory to the... That's where they basically says you must give in your phones and it must be wiped. So, the responsibility was on the actual person, the phone holder, to actually account for that information that they had put installed.
Is the conflation of the security policy with the records policy?
Yeah, so basically just the policy around the gathering of information, but also all of the policies that interact with that, I think is very important. And then the other thing that I picked up was, whilst they now have these enhanced accountability, these performance indicators and expectations, along with measurable targets, I would like to see even a pro forma of what one would look like, anonymised of course, but then also how, because it did stump them, how then do they measure the quality of information going to the scrutiny committees?
I think you made a very good point, and I thought a very fair one, Paul, about the civil servants being aware of the specific responsibility of statutory committees, which is actually distinct and different from, for example, select committees at Westminster or even committees of the Oireachtas, because of our specific statutory role.
our very fine Dallow in the corner is an example of that. Such a thing, equivalent thing does not exist in select committees because we have a statutory responsibility. Okay, that was a useful session. People are content that we're going to proceed now to the next agenda item, which is committee consideration of the request for accelerated passage of the budget number 2 bill. So members, on page 90 of the meeting pack, full details and background to this issue are set out by the clerk, including a list of dates when the committee has received oral briefing on the budget and related issues. Correspondence from the Minister of Finance requesting accelerated passage for the budget number 2 bill is also included, along with a copy of this committee's report on the draft executive and a copy of the budget number 2 bill, including the explanatory and financial memorandum. Members, this is the last scheduled meeting prior to the introduction of the bill on the 1st of July, and thus the last opportunity for members to consider their response to the Minister's request that the committee grants accelerated passage to budget number 2 bill. Delaying the decision presents risks around being able to secure an additional meeting and ensuring quorum to make a decision. At last week's meeting, the committee received a briefing from departmental officials who set out the rationale for this request. Included in the meeting pack and tabled pack are a number of associated papers to assist members' deliberations in this regard. Ministerial correspondence requesting accelerated passage, page 94 of the meeting pack. DOF background paper, which includes information on the budget number 2 bill, which is page 98. Copy of the budget number 2 bill and explanatory financial memorandum, which is page 107. Committee report on engagement on the draft 24-25 executive budget, which obviously we undertook for over the last month or two. And there are formal returns from Agriculture, Economy, Infrastructure, Justice, TO and Communities committees outlining briefings that each has received from their respective departments on post-budget allocations, business plans and June monitoring bids.
Received education as well.
We've also received education.
We forward that on to members.
But that is not to say that we are, speak for myself here, that we're not to say that we are as yet satisfied with consistency of return or use of the pro forma information that's been provided by departments, because I'm certainly not. But we have received information from them. So members, understanding Order 42.2, the committee must decide whether there has been, quote, appropriate consultation, so this is our role, understanding orders, with this committee on the public expenditure proposals contained in the budget number 2 bill 2024. If the committee is content, accelerated passage for the budget number 2 bill 2024 will be granted, and I shall write to the Speaker accordingly. If not, then there will be a committee stage and a delay on the progress of the bill. The committee will then need to decide an approach for a committee stage of the bill, bearing in mind the summer recess and the time limitations of a statutory committee stage. At this stage, I think it's probably worth explaining in a bit more detail what some of those limitations are. The Assembly goes into recess in a week's time, which means that all or part of the committee stage would in all likelihood take place in September, which means that given the 30-day rule, it is unlikely that the next stage of the bill would be until October, and there would then be arguments from the department. I'm sure there would be arguments long before then that we were then pressing up against pressing up against meaningful legal constraints around spending, and that they would be pressing up against headroom. So that's just to explain where we are. It's a bit of an unusual situation because we're approving, because this bill is being introduced essentially a day or two before summer recess. We then have this entire period of summer when people can go away and read the bill and scrutinise and go through all the committee papers, should they wish, but it would not be a formal committee stage. We would then return, and the first thing we would do is have the, second and then immediately afterwards final stage of the bill in September, which would authorise spending, and that's the way it would be. It would be the longest ever accelerated passage in numerical periods there has been, but it would still represent an accelerated passage, and not doing it that way would push in all likelihood final stage of the bill until later in the autumn. So I just wanted to but this is to give members the opportunity to have their say, and I'm happy to take contributions. Deputy Chair first, then Steve Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. And just to be clear, in case I'm missing it, I don't see any response from the Health Committee. Is that right?
No, that was the one we hadn't had response
And
from. Now we've
that's
had.
the one I'd raised most
Chair, I should
concern about.
clarify. We had
Education.
we had educators who've come in, but we had an informal response from them previously when I did a round robin of clerks, not going through the committee structure. We have not received their formal submission, if you like. I know they had taken some briefings, and I know that committee had expressed a level of dissatisfaction with the content. But we have not had, I have to stress, we have not had a formal response from them at this point.
Sure, I would just be very concerned that we've had no communication from the Health Committee, given that that the health budget's the one that there's the biggest questions around. And also I'd asked if the Permanent Secretary there of Finance, when he was there, could he highlight how many departments and which ones would be at risk of the 65% voting account, and he didn't just have that detail, and that would be one of the main reasons when you're reading into it that the accelerated passage is being pushed for in case people run out of money partially through the year. So again, just that lack of information, once again, I find quite concerning.
Frustrating. The slightly frustrating things we get whenever we the 65% is always, or the voting account is always, we have to do it now because and then whenever you're like, well, when exactly or give us an approximate time of when the pressures will rise, we can't do that. So it's a bit anyway. Deirdre and then Steve.
Yeah, no, just, I mean, I would be happy to support accelerated passage. I know you asked earlier in terms of departments. I mean, one that I just would have knew from examples, the likes of DFC, and it's particularly around the demand-led services like discretionary support. And particularly, I mean, I'm just conscious, as you laid out the timetable there, Matthew, that you're going into the winter period again. That's when those services, the demand increases, and making sure that there's the access to the cash to release. Is one of the areas. Now, I know they didn't answer all of it, and I know they talk about pressures more broadly, but I know it is in the likes of DFC, where it's public-led in terms of low-income families that are struggling and stuff. So I would be concerned not proceeding with accelerated passage, and particularly with the summer recess, and then as you go further into the winter, it would be a concern. So, I mean, I would be happy if the committee agreed to it in this instance.
Yeah, just a couple of ones. I think, was it you, Deirdre? I can't remember who asked the question of Permanent Secretary, Department of Finance, and asked Neil, and asked a specific question about it, and he said it was not of immediate concern. I think when he was asked about sort of the, he did say that, and sort of not the, and to me it's also tied in with this idea, like we still haven't had any answer yet on the soon-to-be July monitoring round, like how much is in it, where it is, what's the varies of it, where it's all sitting. There just seems to be an awful lot of unponderables here, and we're heading into sort of coming back in September, where very soon thereafter I would imagine there'll be an autumn statement arriving fairly soon thereafter. I mean, I'm right this present moment in time, I'm in two minds about whether we should.
I mean, it's important to say that the June or July monitoring does not directly, I mean, it's all part of the same budget process, but they're not.
It doesn't feature in the bill. It doesn't feature.
You're not authorising the spending that was in the June.
I know that, but it just, again, through the chair, it just seems here again. There's far too many bits we don't know of this.
Well, that may always be the case. Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair, and just I'm content to proceed with accelerated passage. It is fairly standard for budget bills to proceed via accelerated passage, so there's nothing particularly unusual about it. And it isn't like other bills, it's not, long scrolling detail of legislation that we're scrutinising. We've known what the budget policy is now for over a month. We have been in detailed conversations with the department and been scrutinising the decisions that have been made, and this is simply about giving legal cover to that spend. So I'm entirely comfortable with it and see no reason whatsoever to take any kind of risk by refusing to grant it on this occasion.
It is important to say that should I or the Deputy Chair be giving a statement formally saying the committee has said there had been bringing as a consultation, you can obviously append to that lots of other comments about the things that we haven't received in order to put that on the record. Paul Frew, did you wish to come in? Or?
No, other than just echo the sentiments of Diane with regards to the Department of Health. It doesn't bode well, with regards to that department jumping up and down looking for more money, and they can't even they can't even furnish their scrutiny committee with their responses. It just beggars belief. I'm sure that'll come out in the speeches.
Well, indeed. Well, it's important to say that in relation to other committees, ideally we will have returns from them, and we should. It's important to say in terms of what the health department, we can't control what the health department gives to the health committee. What we can put in place are specific structures and ensure that we are asking the health committee for maximum information. But points are well made. Now, so we've had a discussion. Given where we are, I am going to put the question, and if members so wish, we can divide. I mean, I suppose it's worth putting my own views on the record. I clearly have been robust in terms of lack of scrutiny at times on certain things. I have to say I'm not particularly convinced that granting accelerated passage to this bill at this time is the greatest failure of scrutiny. I think there are other mechanisms by which we do scrutiny all the time, certainly in this committee, in the chamber. So I don't think that granting accelerated passage on this occasion means that we are failing in our scrutiny duties. In part, that's because, as far as we can establish, every single other budget bill that has ever been presented to the Northern Ireland Assembly has received accelerated passage.
I can attest to that, yeah.
So, having put those comments on the record.
Well, Chair, I've only just made up my mind there about an hour ago.
Okay. So I'm going to put the question, and if people wish to express dissent, please do.
I was going to say he's the dissenter too.
Well, this is where it's supposed to unite dissenters. The question is that the Committee for Finance is content that there has been appropriate consultation with it in respect to the public expenditure proposals covered in the Budget Number 2 bill, and is willing to grant the accelerated passage for the bill. Are people content?
Agreed.
Content? Agreed. Okay. Now, next item is the agenda item 7, which is the Public Sector Transformation Board oral briefing from the Department of Finance. There is a Clark's memo at page 320 of the meeting pack, and page 322 of the meeting pack is a departmental briefing paper provided in advance of the session. Hello, and obviously
We're here to
we have obviously covered this with the head of the civil service. Copy of the pro forma issued by the interim board to government departments seeking transformation proposals has been provided, as well as the title of transformation proposals submitted by DOF itself. So if you look in your pack, you will see what was sent to departments on the 31st of May, I believe, to ask them what to ask them for returns. The briefing paper, in its briefing paper, the department has indicated to us that the Minister of Finance will update the committee when there is progress in relation to supplementing the interim board with relevant experts. I should say, not to be too pointed about it, but I'm glad of that, because we did not get updated candidly as I think we should have been. We should have been when an interim board was appointed. But I'm glad that we now have a briefing and we have written information as well. And also, it's indicated the officials will provide regular updates to the committee. So I'm really delighted to have Tony Simpson, Deputy Secretary of Strategic Policy and Reform, Aidan McMahon, Director of Fiscal Policy Division, hello Aidan, and also Julianne Kieran, who is Principal Economist. Thank you all, and thank you all very much for waiting. We appreciated your busy people, and we had a long evidence session with the head of the civil service and others, so we appreciate your time and your patience. So it would be helpful if you could give us an opening statement, and we'll then ask some questions. And obviously members, as always, indicate should you wish to ask a question.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to update the committee on the Transformation Board, how it was established and how it's taken forward its important work. As you say, I'm delighted to be joined by colleagues from my department who have been supporting this work. So Aidan McMahon, who's, you said, is the new director of the recently established Fiscal Policy Division, and Julianne Kieran, who's a Principal Economist from Strategic Policy Division. And in a sense, the officials in front of you this afternoon reflect the agile approach that we've taken in DOF to this, kind of leaning in, working across teams at pace to progress this work until the final arrangements and structures are agreed for the Transformation Board. I trust members have had an opportunity to read the update paper that we've provided, and with your agreement, I'll just briefly describe the funding that has been made available, the parameters around it, and the approach that is being taken. So 235 million of ring-fence funding was provided as part of the financial package, 47 million per annum over 5 years. The release of that funding is contingent on the establishment of a public sector transformation board involving both Northern Ireland civil servants and UK government representatives, and that board assessing projects as being genuinely transformational in nature. And those stipulations were set out in the financial package, a letter from the Chief Secretary on the 13th of February, and in the interim fiscal framework itself. The Finance Minister was keen that urgent progress was made in putting the necessary arrangements in place on an interim basis to allow for the best use of the available funding at the earliest opportunity. And on the 9th of May, the Executive agreed the Finance Minister's interim approach to transformation, including, as you said, the establishment of the interim Public Sector Transformation Board. And shortly after this, the Finance Minister wrote to then Jayne Brady, the head of the service, inviting her to chair, Francis Ruan, who's an independent member of the next board, to be a member, and also to the Secretary of State, seeking a nomination on behalf of the UK Government. And then he subsequently responded, nominating Julie Harrison, the NIO PermSec.
Just so we're clear, Tony, before you go on, so how specific was it, the restoration package, around the membership? It was clear there was going to be a UK government representative?
It talks about UK government representative and experts.
Experts.
Mm-hmm. So there's no more detail in those.
That's the final board rather than the interim board. Specific.
Yeah, well, there's no.
Doesn't define. Doesn't make.
Yeah. So there's no discussion of an interim board in any of those documents. Okay. Just talking about a final board. Yeah. So after the minister had written, the first meeting of the interim board was on the 21st of May, just 4 days after she had issued her invitations, and the board then agreed a pro forma, which you've seen, and issued a call to departments to submit transformation proposals on the 31st of May. As you've seen, allowing departments to submit up to 6 proposals, 4 that are smaller in scale, less than 10 million, and 2 larger scale proposals valued between 10 and 100 million pounds. And departments were asked to target activities aimed to achieve at least some of the following objectives: increased financial sustainability, transforming public service delivery and outcomes, and prevention and early intervention. And by the 19th of May, all departments have put forward transformation proposals within those boundaries.
End
of June, sorry. 47 in total. And as members will have seen, the department itself has put forward 6 proposals.
Now, are the departments required to put forward transformation proposals?
No, it's up to the departments whether they want to put a bid forward.
It's an invitation. But obviously, in terms of that number, the limit of 6 and with a total of 47, and departments have certainly taken that opportunity to put proposals forward to the board.
There's not a numerical limit on how much. So, in terms of the £235 million, there's no numerical limit on how many transformation projects you could have 235 and £1 million each.
Yeah, well, there's no stipulation, but obviously we trying to kind of control the response from departments, put a limit on in terms of 6 coming in. But in terms of the recommendations that the board may make to the Finance Minister, and the Finance Minister and the Executive may take, there's no sense. But obviously, when the board and ministers are considering this, they will want to give a consideration to what's going to be impactful. So our sense is that will be a combination of some more meaty, substantial proposals, and then we've also, those smaller scale we view as more perhaps the opportunity for departments to pilot new, innovative, transformative approaches. So that's the thinking behind that. So the board has been meeting, and supported by DOF officials, is working at pace to assess those proposals, with a view to providing its advice to the Finance Minister as soon as possible. And in terms of those small-scale proposals, funding decisions are expected to be based on the information in the pro forma that's been provided by departments, with the hope that we could be releasing funding in due course. For the larger-scale proposals, which pass an initial sift by the board, departments will be asked to undertake an additional process for application and assessment, just given the higher scale of transformation funding that they involve. So you obviously can provide the level of information and give the consideration based on the performance on their own.
It can't be one thing. So that, like, the most obvious one is the biggest budget, and the one that people would argue might be the one where there's the most conversation around transformation is the health department. If the health department came and said, we want all £235 million, and this is what we're going to deliver. We're going to deliver this, and elective waiting list will be
reduced by 80% in the next. I'm just making these numbers up, but they can't do that. The rules you have set don't allow them to do that.
Yeah, but
it has to.
No, so they don't. But as I say, the scale for the larger ones is 10 to 100 million.
I'm not saying they should, by the way. I'm just
yes. So, but there is the opportunity there for departments to put forward quite substantial, if we put a limit on there of £100 million.
Yeah.
So I suppose, having said that, the only final point I'll make in these opening remarks is that work is ongoing separately to develop the terms of reference that will need to be agreed for the board in due course. So with that, colleagues and I are happy to take any questions that members may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. That was a really, I think, sharp and also admirably concise briefing. You're good. Yes, indeed, and your time as well, because we've kept you waiting. Just on the proposals, so you DOF have put in a number of proposals themselves. How many have you had? Is it 47? You said
47
you've had so far. And when do you anticipate being able to make a decision? Will need to be a final board, and then the final board will need to advise the minister, who will need to bring them to the executive?
Yes.
Yeah. And when is the target date for that? Is it August, whenever the sustainability plan is?
There isn't. Well, we're keen to move as quickly as we can. So there's no final target or timeline that we are working to.
Yeah.
I suppose the key driver for the pace behind this as well is the desire to be able to start spending money this year. So the parameters around the funding that the UK government provided is that it's £47 million per year. So if we are to spend £47 million in this year, clearly we want to be making decisions around that as soon as possible.
And is your view that, will you give a particular, because you've set out in the proof where the weighting is, so for example, is the project transformative? Now when you say transformative, does transformative mean transformative in terms of saving money, or transformative in terms of improving service, or both? If it's both, is it very, very transformative if it's both, or if it's one or the other, it's a bit transformative?
I was going to say it can be a mixture of those things,
okay.
and the objectives that Tony outlined at the start that are in your paper, those 3 bullet points, are the focus that we've asked departments to come back on. So it can be a mixture.
Sustainability, transform delivery, prevention, cost savings.
Exactly. Early intervention, prevention, and cost saving. So that's the focus that we've asked departments to come back on that basis.
Isn't the final one a kind of a summary of the first in some ways, in the sense that increased financial sustainability implies cost savings? No? Or is that an unfair?
Yeah, there is overlap, and I think the third as well, is pointing to, we're early so it's in the context of looking at early interventions and early action, and really in trying to frame these objectives, we're trying to, one, very clearly signal what we're expecting from departments in terms of the nature of transformation and innovation that we want, but also providing that freedom of the flexibility and scope that departments can genuinely put forward the ideas without being too prescriptive and inadvertently ruling something out.
And are there, is the plan that you would go to, so I certainly think most of us would prefer to see a different UK government as of next Friday, but would the plan be to go to them and say, with the finance minister, go and say, well, look, there's this model's been set up, we would like this to increase because we think over the course of, for example, the rest of this mandate, we can deliver more in terms of transformation if there's more investment than the 235 million. Would that be part of the argument that your department will be hoping to take to the Treasury?
Well, there's no discussions. Let me say.
Obviously, have to wait until next.
Yeah. No, what we've said is certainly that we view this. This is defined around the funding that's being made available in the financial package.
Yeah.
So there is a sense where the initial focus now is deploying that funding, but where the scope of this, the transformation board, could evolve. If it does prove to be successful, then this could be a mechanism where either certainly ministers could be looking the UK government to lean in with that with more support, or the executive itself could be looking to use that as a mechanism to prioritise and use funding. So, but the initial focus now is on the money that's available, but that's not prejudicing any discussions that happen between ministers and the next government.
So Aidan and Julianne's an economist. Aidan, I don't know if you're an economist too, but you're from the fiscal policy team. So, are you going to be looking at are you going to be scoring these policies in terms of cost savings over a horizon period, over sort of 3, 4, 5 years? In terms of, first of all, the internal discussions, and then will you go to the Treasury and say, well, look, this £10 million investment we think is going to lead to a cost saving over a 4 to 5 year horizon?
Well, what we will be doing, and as I said at the outset, we've put the kind of the resource and the people in place to support the work of the board kind of very quickly. So we've been drawing on, obviously our department has given the work that we do day and daily in assessing proposals and bids and allocating money. We're ideally placed to support it. We're not providing that advice to the UK government, we're providing that advice to the Transformation Board, and it's for the Transformation Board to then make those recommendations to the Finance Minister. Yeah. So the role of the UK government is around, have we established that board? So that was the condition and stipulation was set out. There isn't any sense that we are providing advice.
On devolution, but obviously if you're, okay.
So obviously there's the membership of the board, which includes Julie Harrison, who's the NIO Perm Sec, but we're not going to
I suppose my point was less about telling the UK government and more about being able to evidence that there's going to be a cost saving over the course, and that is part of the work that's going on. I presume that's why.
That's part of the assessment process that we'll take forward on behalf of the board, and then advise the board as the Department of Finance to say, here's our assessment based on the pro forma that's been put forward, the departments have completed, here's our assessment of the projects that go forward. But obviously it's for the board then to make the final judgment call in terms of their advice to the Finance Minister.
Okay, I'm going to bring in others. Thank you. Diane, first.
Thank you, Chair.
And
thank you all for being here. I think transformation, and we're all delighted to see you and hitting the ground running. We all know that we need that. I was just wondering, a common theme coming through in this department and others is that of siloed government. So I was just wondering, in terms of the proposals that have come through, if you give us a bit of a flavour for them, are they coming through cross-cutting in nature, or is it quite individual for departments, because there's great potential here, so just a bit of an idea of what's coming through?
Well, I suppose I'll describe maybe the way they've been invited. So we have invited cross-departmental proposals in terms of how they'll be scoring. The board will be looking at the extent to which, so there will be consideration giving us as cross-cutting and so on. We're not in the position maybe to share, so obviously the board are working through that at this point in time. We're not in the position to share the kind of detail of the proposals that we've received. Other than I can say that obviously there's 47 and there's they're spread across departments, so the broad representation of departments.
Maybe I was going to just add on to Tony's point, there's a specific weighting attached to cross-departmental bids to try and encourage some of those bids to come forward.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. As I say, just common theme coming through, and everything that I'm working on, so it's great to hear. And just another one quickly, I was wondering what's the potential for impact within this 24-25 financial year? Is there any ones that are able to hit the ground running with some impacts this year?
Well, that's, I suppose, the why we've been keen to move at pace in terms of getting this. So it's certainly our intention that we will be able to start funding projects this year. It depends on the nature of the projects we've got in. It depends on the nature of the assessment in terms of how the board view them as to whether they're generally transformational, whether they should be prioritised. But that's been the driver for all of this, to be able to start utilising this money as soon as possible.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.
And I would just add on to Tony's point again, within the pro forma there's a question that asks, when can this project start? Can it start this year? And so that's something the board will consider as they're making their assessment and providing that to the Finance Minister.
Well, that's great, and we look forward to hearing all the updates on it. Absolutely.
I was just going to say, and probably worth saying, that larger projects that go forward will go to another stage of assessment given their larger funding, so it's likely that it would be smaller projects that we get to go ahead first.
No, it's a good news story, so it's good to have the updates. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so thank you. So 47 per annum is the plan, but do you lose 47 million if you don't spend it?
Well, there have been so if it looks like we can't use that we will be, so it's already been signalled the UK government that the potential for reprofiling is something that we would like to be considered on their part. So certainly the last thing we would want to be doing would be surrendering any money. So there already has been representations made, as far as I'm aware, to UK government that we may need some reprofiling depending on the nature of the project and proposals that come forward.
Surely that makes sense, because transformation isn't just an immediate thing. You want to have long-term scale planning involved in this. So given that pressure, I suspect there's a certain compromise with regards to shovel readiness and effectiveness with regards to transformation. And what I mean is that you would nearly take projects that are just about to go, even though you might not rate them highly in a transformational sense.
Well, I suppose that's what I would say is that's where the role of the board will come in. So the board have to take a view that the projects that they're going to put forward and recommend to the Finance Minister are genuinely transformational. I can't speak for UK government officials, but obviously, you know, they are keen that the board plays that role, and that's why the board has been established. Yes, this has moved very quickly, but the other point to make is we have been in discussions with departments for some time, signalling, you know, even in the preparation and for the restoration of the executive, one of the conversations we were having them was around transformation and considering what needs to be done, what type of proposed projects could be possible if transformation funding was available. So yes, the turnaround here has been quite quick, but however, these are conversations that have been going on for a period of time.
Notwithstanding the fact that Jayne Brady sits on this interim board, where is the actual connection between what should be conceived as a programme for government and transformation? Because surely in the programme for government, transformation will be key. So how confident are you that with regards to the bids and with regards to the adjudication on those bids, that they will be aligned with whatever the programme for government throws out?
Well, I suppose in an ideal world, you know, if this was being framed in a programme for government, we'd be able to consider it in that context. However, in the absence of an agreed programme for government, certainly departments have their priorities established, strategies and plans that departments have in place, and given the parameters that we've put around this funding, so it's not around introducing new policies or new strategies that would need to be aligned with a new policy direction in the programme for government. It's about how do we do things better. You know, how can we be more innovative? How can we get better outcomes for citizens? How can we spend our money more effectively? So I think in that context, we as a department would be confident that, you know, the funding can be deployed in a way that will be useful and impactful.
Last question, Chair. You said 47 bids from departments. Can you name the departments, if any, that haven't bid?
All departments have put forward bids.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Judy Hartley.
Yeah, thanks very much for your presentation. Just two areas. The first is around, there's a mixture of projects, so some of them will be looking to be scalable. So it's just the issue around testing some projects then in terms of their viability, and I suppose if it has the impact and outcome that it wants to achieve. So in that then looks at a level of risk. And I suppose part of the issue up until now has been that we're too rigid sometimes in terms of looking at working at risk, particularly with these smaller projects. So it's just, is that being considered then as part of the bids? I know it's come up heavily in the likes of justice and health and the kind of intersectionality between those two areas, particularly with their demand-led services. And the other bit then as well that you touched on, Aidan, in terms of the three areas that you've invited bids to kind of look at broadly. It's just really how you're going to measure in terms of the outcomes then at the other end, what that's going to look like. Are you going to measure those things in terms of improvement of outcomes for citizens? Are you also going to measure in terms of Section 75 and inequality? Are they part of those measurements in terms of those three criteria? Is that going to be built in then to the process? Yeah. And the other bit was around the bigger bids. Is there a bid, for example, going in this year that will impact on the funding next year? Or are there going to be three separate kind of processes over the next period?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll try and take some of those. So in terms of risk appetite, yes, there's certainly something that's being considered in the board. I think I have taken the position that they're open and have signalled that they want to look at those innovative approaches, and it's recognised that can come with a degree of risk, and precisely to do that, to use pilots to see is this an effective approach, and if it is successful, that could be scalable at a later point.
So the smaller projects can be important, even though they may not look it, but they're critical. Yeah. Okay.
In terms of the proposals or the template that's being put forward, it is asking departments to kind of set out what they're seeking to achieve. Okay. Now, as part of the terms of reference, as part of that approach or piece of work that we're doing to agree the terms of reference and how the board operates on a more longer term basis, it's envisaged that board would be reporting perhaps on an annual basis. Here's progress. Here's a number of projects that have been funded. Here's where they are, if they've completed, here's the outcomes, if they've been evaluated. So that needs to be set out in the final terms of reference, but I would imagine it will include a degree of, or not a degree, it will include an element of monitoring and evaluation. By its nature of this type of work, monitoring and evaluation will be important to see whether or not these are effective interventions. On
Section, I was going to say, just on Section 75, you'll see in the pro forma there's a page that's dedicated to asking the question about whether proposals put forward by departments have been screened for Section 75. And obviously we haven't known what we were going to get from departments until this point in time, but separately we've been discussing with the Equality Commission, making sure that we're doing the right things to make sure that projects and the approach that we're taking is screened for Section 75.
It's just to add, sorry, because I know it's not included as a category under, but social class, because obviously that is something that's coming up in terms of inequality and poverty and working class communities. I know I'd mentioned it earlier, you know, just even in terms of the employment market and where people are employed. I give the example of the creative industries. A recent report here in England, Scotland and Wales that only 8% in the creative industries come from working class backgrounds. Over 60% come from middle to upper class backgrounds. And I'm assuming that's a trend that will exist in many sectors. So it's just making sure that the class is included as part of that element as well.
Certainly something, as the board is then thinking about what it needs to monitor, how it's going to take forward, it's certainly something that we can feed into their considerations as a point that's being raised. And the last point I think that you made was around the profile. So where we've invited bids, we've asked them to set out the profile. So of spend, that could be over 1 year, it could be over the full 5 years of the programme, depending on the nature of the proposal that's being brought forward. So it's not that a department needs to come back every year. What we will do is when the board makes its recommendations and there's decisions by ministers, then the board, there will need to be a consideration, well, when do we need to reopen a new invitation? So consideration needs to be given to the timing of that, depending on how we use the money and what the profile of that looks like over time.
Thank you.
Okay, no other members at this stage have indicated they wish to come in. One final one from me, and I think this is a really useful briefing. But I suppose to play devil's advocate slightly, looking at some of the bids submitted by the Department of Finance, are you first of all, I presume you yourselves will not have been the officials who wrote the Department of Finance's bids. That will have been a different bid of the department?
So the individual bids came from individual grade 3 directorates.
Yes.
And then were provided to our finance department, our finance director, and were considered by the permanent secretary, who then in turn provided advice to the ministers. So no, I haven't personally seen them, and we're providing those ethical walls between the teams that were provided, the individuals that were providing to support the board.
Good. No. So, but I suppose just looking at some of what's been submitted, things like the Integrate programme, Civil Service Workforce and Organisation of the Future, both very important. Indeed, we've heard about the Integrate programme, but I mean, we know the Integrate programme is happening anyway. It is by definition, I mean, it's not BAU in the sense that it's a new project, but it was already happening, so it's not a new bit of transformation. How much, isn't there a risk that some of these things are coming in and there's not really that much additionality in terms of transformation? It's just that we think this thing is transformational that we're already doing, and we'd like a bit more cash for it. Isn't that a risk?
I suppose the one thing the Integrate programme is, I suppose, is a bit unique. So when at the time of the budget, it was signalled that the department and the executive were going to make funding available for Integrate, but always on the basis that when the transformation programme was opened, that there would be a bid made, because this is seen as a genuinely transformational project, but that there was a commitment that had to be made at that point whether or not we were going to proceed. If it's successful, it would be funded under the transformation. You're right, it will proceed. There's a commitment to it anyway, but if funding is made available, that will free up other monies for other pressures. Aside from that, if you think around what
isn't that a worry then, because what you're doing is sort of displacement, and you're just funding something that was already being funded?
That's it. I suppose that's one specific case, and it will be for the board to determine whether or not that's successful or not. Yeah. On the others, if you think around the nature of what the department does, so these are new activities that weren't being supported before. So if you think around the role of the department and the proposals that have been put forward around workforce and organisation in the future, looking at our people, looking at our data in terms of the work of NISRA and how that can be modernised and automated and kind of generate savings. The asset unit, getting a better handle on the public sector estate and how the value of it and so on, and how that can be utilised. So new generated citizen services, again thinking about how we can use new technologies to make services more accessible and more have a better impact for citizens. So no, I would happily say that on behalf of the department that we would, these, aside from that unique different approaches taken to integrate, but we're content with the approach we're taking to integrate, these are new proposals that have been brought forward by business service.
Okay, and I hope that's also true of that they're genuinely transformational with the bids coming through from other departments, and I have no doubt that you will be looking at them in that regard and advising the interim board. No other members?
I was just going to say, maybe add on to that as well, that the pro forma will state and ask what is the activity stated within the pro forma that's additional to what's being done currently.
Okay.
So we will try to have a gauge so that the board has an assessment of what's being done now versus what will this do in terms of additional activity.
Okay, could I ask, can we ask, in terms of information you have said you'd keep us updated, it would be helpful if we could have a specific written update, ideally before we break up next week, but if not, soon after that, on when you expect to have the final board named and all that, because it might well happen over the summer, so it would be very helpful if the committee could be, because we can be in communication with one another over the summer, but even if we're not sitting.
Yeah, so I suppose the one thing I will say, and I'm happy to provide a response. One thing, obviously, the terms are the board need, the final board needs, a condition is that the final board needs to be agreed before funds are deployed and released. So obviously we want keen to move at pace, but the general election, obviously, and the appointment of new ministers in London is a factor that's impacting on the timelines that are outside of our control. So obviously we will be seeking to engage with new ministers
because the UK ministers need to agree the membership of the final board
of the transformation board. Yes. So it's been put in place on an interim basis now, so that we can move forward to deploy the funding. And
apologies if you covered this already, but do you have specific names in mind already who have either been approached or are on a sheet of paper?
No. So at the moment we've appointed the interim board.
Yes, the interim board,
but there's no. But again, there will need to be discussions then when the
so there's no there isn't a tentative list for the final board. It's a blank sheet of paper at the minute.
No, and one of the other things that we have is the ability for it to draw in other experts. So
to be paid for their time.
Yeah, presumably, yeah. And again, we have that hasn't been confirmed yet, but depending on the nature of the proposal. So as you're saying, in terms of that scrutiny and challenge role, so if we do have a proposal coming forward that the board may think we need particular expertise in that specific area, be it health or education, then there's opportunity for the board to say we would like to lever that in. That could be from the UK government civil service, or it could be other independent experts. That will be up to the board.
It would be helpful to keep in touch, just given the timelines and the fact that some of this has to be spent in a year. But look, thank you very much. No one else has indicated they wish to speak, and thank you for your patience in briefing us. You can blame your boss, the head of the civil service, being so interesting, and us for asking interminable questions. Thank you very much, and we do look forward to hearing from you again in the not too distant future, and please keep us posted on those actions. Thank you.
Okay. See you guys.
Ian, Tony and Julianne. Okay.
Just if members are willing to agree, we put an oral briefing in the forward work programme on a TBC basis, so that when we have everything in place, we then have already got agreement to bring officials back in to brief on the board. Also, I think we have agreement on previously, and I'm looking to Clarita to say yes on this. I think we got agreement previously on bringing up the board. Or on board? Yeah, didn't we? Yes, we did. So we already have that in place. So this will be just getting officials back.
Yeah.
So we can get
the board
sort of granular detail before
we
do that.
Great. Fine. The next item is the monthly outturn written briefing. At page 340 of the meeting pack, you will see the department has provided a written briefing on the monthly outturn, which covers April and May 24. This briefing outlines expenditure outturn and forecast outturn from all departments in respect of non-ring-fenced resource DEL, ring-fenced resource DEL, capital DEL, and ring-fenced financial transactions capital. It is highlighted that some departments have included confirmed funding packages in their forecasts in anticipation of funding being confirmed to the Westminster main estimates and allocated in the June monitoring round. A number of departments have also included budget cover transfers from Whitehall departments and technical adjustments between executive departments in their forecast outturn. This has resulted in forecast overspends of 96.4 million in non-ring-fenced RDEL,
Specific amounts are detailed in Table 1 of the Department's briefing paper at page 342 of the meeting pack. The Department has indicated that these should be eliminated when June monitoring is completed. In respect of Ring-Fence Dell, there is an underspend of 74 million, mainly in the Department of Economy and due to the same student loan issue highlighted previously to the committee, which is basically a technical accounting issue to do with the fact that we get these Barnett consequentials through student loans that are not spent here habitually. That will then be amended at Westminster main estimate stage. There's also DERA and DOJ pressures anticipated funding for Protocol/Windsor Framework funding, for Protocol Windsor Framework, which will be made available in June monitoring. Underspends in relation to capital firstly occur in DOH due to reduced requirement for the Mother and Children's Hospital, secondly and thirdly in DERA and DFI. However, it is indicated these pressures will be addressed as part of monitoring. In relation to FTC, there is an underspend within DFE due to a reduction in Invest NI's FTC projected expenditure and an increase in its FTC projected income. The Department indicate the Department's total forecast outturn must come to within agreed controls for each category, and that this is the case for all departments, with the exception of the 96.4 million, which will be resolved once June monitoring is completed. The Department highlights that it will be closely monitoring the position in relation to overcommitments throughout the year to ensure that this reduces to zero. The Department will report on this as part of the monthly outturn forecast briefing when the outcome of monitoring has been agreed and factored into forecasts. Finally, the Department indicates that should a Department appear not to be acting to live within the budget, this will be brought to the Executive's attention given the consequences and risk to the overall block. Do any members have any comments they wish to make? Diane, Forsyth?
Yes, Chair. Just a couple of points. I know I'd raised it before through writing. Apologies, I wasn't here last time. Just the lack of accessibility to the dashboard and the format of this information. You outlined it there, and yes, it's forecast. It's taking account of a lot of things. I'm very concerned that we're not looking at any actuals or actual management accounts as to where we expect to be at this point during the year, because whenever Joanne McBurney was here at the very start of this term, she assured that was how they were keeping the close scrutiny on it. And I know myself, having prepared this many times, and I don't see it in any of these documents. For example, the table here where we've got our forecast outturn, we're just colouring in April and May grey that it's been incurred and the rest is forecast, whereas we should actually have a profiled expenditure plan for the full year to see where they had forecast they would be at April and they would be at May. So as at May, are we overspent or underspent in actual terms as at May, to see where we're at? Because the point where we're saying here that we're relying on the department to indicate if a department appears not to be acting within its budget, how are we actually able to scrutinise this when we're looking at the aspirational outturn over an entire year? We don't actually know where they thought they would be at a point in time during the year. So where I fully expect that everyone has these live management accounts, they talked about them on the dashboard, I feel that we should be getting a point as at where we're getting May's. There should be a forecast as at May, an outturn as at May, so we can see what that looks like, as well as the outturn. And then just also, we're getting this in terms of all of the departments. Are the individual scrutiny committees for all of the departments getting these for theirs? I just was wondering, so for example, you have DERA here again. This is where they're at. Here are the pressures on it. We have a couple of paragraphs about DERA. I'm just using it for example. There's some about health. Is the DERA committee getting that? Is the health committee getting that? And just, I think a bit of clarity around that will be good, because again, they're the ones that know where the pressures are specifically in their department. So just to make sure that they're getting access to this information for their own departments. Just a bit of clarity.
Chair, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think back. The previous 4 committees I was on, whether we ever saw this. I think it varies. Chair, can I suggest just at this point that the committee makes an agreement running forward that we will always forward these to the other stat committees, so that they are aware, they know they can be guaranteed of getting that information on the basis that we do.
I think that makes sense, and I also think it would be helpful for the department to provide a commentary or an answer on the points Diane raised around the actuals and kind of the kind of ongoing management accounts and how that is monitored. It may be that there is a a civil service reason why they don't provide that information in real time, but that we can raise it with them.
Chair, I'm fully confident that it would be available somewhere, but I just would question how useful this is for us in terms of scrutiny that we're talking about. They're talking in numbers that we are expecting to get through monitoring rounds, but where are they really? What's the worst case scenario here?
Okay. Any other comments? Steve Aiken was...
Yeah, no, I'm just sort of looking at Table 1. For the forecast overspends, it's 96.4 million, but 80.2 million of that's from the Northern Ireland Protocol. It just seems to be completely skewed. I'd just like to have a bit more information. I understand the DERA one, I know what that's from, but I don't know why all the others are sort of come up like that. Just seems strange on a sort of forecast overspend of 96.4 million. Sort of well over, sort of just doing my maths, but sort of 85% of it is on NI protocol. Just hope nobody's using this as like an accounting tool to do it, but just a bit more granularity, using that horrible word, might be useful.
Yeah, that's a good question, and we can ask those questions. Okay, if members are content with the written briefing at that point, we can move on to the next, and we'll obviously it'll be forwarded to other committees. The next item is from the Department of Finance on banking hubs. This was an issue raised by the Deputy Chair, and we agreed to bring it back because there's a specific policy and also local issue. At the meeting 5th of June, we agreed to request the information, which is the detailed on the operations of the hubs and transactions, including at Kilkeel and other banking hubs. Anybody wish to come in? Deputy Chair, yes.
Thank you, and thank you for holding this.
No,
when I
worry.
had a personal commitment last week. Just on this, and I do welcome the response, but just to go through it, the review they had overall was 2021, and it wasn't specific to Northern Ireland. So I would suggest that that overall they could do with an updated one. But as we go on, they're talking about the review of how the banking hub has gone in Kilkeel, and I just note that it's not addressing any customer satisfaction or addressing the access to cash. It's just reporting on what there is, and I'm not aware of any survey of customers or locals or local representatives as to how it's going. And I just want to highlight once again that I am concerned that banking hubs are not the answer to access to cash when they don't have ATMs and they don't have access to cash outside of 9 to 5 working hours.
Indeed, and I think we also have an action and part of our strategic planning to come back and look at financial services more broadly. I think this will be a crucial part of it. So having discussed it last week, I don't know. Yes.
Chair, can I just get members' agreement? Obviously now we've had Cash Access UK identified as kind of being the body that is developing this. If members are content, we'll seek to get a briefing from Cash Access UK to come to committee to talk about all this, because there's a lot of clarity that members have highlighted they could that they're interested in having, but probably best to directly engage with them around that, plus any feedback members want to give. So,
Chair, I'd mentioned the clerk before. I'm sure we could always have a meeting out in Kilkeel at the bank and have if we wanted to get the committee out on the road.
Great bit of seafood as well down there. We'll get some.
Dear committee's there tomorrow.
Very quickly.
I know exactly. So what my priorities are in my stomach. Okay, people are content with that. We'll go. Yes, sorry.
Well, I know in the forward work programme we have agreed, haven't we, that we're going to look at the financial institutions.
So we
that's definitely something we're going to
We've research planned to report at the start of October.
Yep.
And then if we can try and get a briefing like this organised for a similar time, then would allow us to kind of unpack more about what members want to do going forward through the autumn and then into the
okay. Grant. The next item is under matters arising is SEPB annual report and accounts, which is at page 358 of the meeting pack. You can see it there. Members previously noted on 12th of June that the accounts hadn't been laid, and the committee raised particular queries in relation to expenditure, where we await the department responding to those queries. So that's to note, unless anybody wishes to come in.
They come in this afternoon.
They come in, okay.
So we have them in next pack.
Fine, okay, the next pack. People are content. Next item is a report on the defamation review. The department has laid its report on the review of the Defamation NI Act 2022 in the business office and provided members with a copy. I think that's something we're going to obviously pick up on in the autumn. That's to note, unless any member wishes to make a comment or any further information. Okay. Page 9.4 is page 9.4. Item 9.4 is the June monitoring bids. At page 28 of the table pack, the department has supplied the committee with details of bids included in June monitoring. The department is awaiting the outcome of these bids. However, they are as follows: £545,000 for the development of NICS's new 5-year strategy, 3.7 million for increased employers' pension contributions, just over £500,000, 532k for government land property register, and 1.26 million for critical work on proposals for the future census. I should say that's the departments. The Department of Finance's monitoring bids, not everyone's monitoring bids. So that is to note these bids pending further. Yes, Paul.
Yes, if you thank the Department for this information, it is a duty on them to present to the Scrutiny Committee their bids. 7 days, I think they have. That came out of a clause from the Function of Government Bill.
Whose amendment was that?
I think it was myself who had it. But what would be interesting to know is if this committee can find out from the other committees, and as part of their budgetary scrutiny role, is that if all other scrutiny departments have received the bids from the other departments.
That's a good question.
We have a partial reporting back on that as part of the returns that we had. I don't think it was consistent.
It's always inconsistent.
It is. Chair, that's just possibly a useful moment to bring up that the committee, as part of its priority setting in September, may well want to look at the issue of specific provision of documents like these, particularly where there is already agreement that they will be provided. I think other statutory committees may not necessarily have the sort of knowledge that this committee carries in terms of what should be asked for, what should be available. So there's a piece of work to be done around that, and it's something that I think, if members are agreeable,
having said that, so yes, but there is the onus and of course the legal duty on the department to furnish the committee with this information, whether the committee knows it or not. So the onus and the responsibility lies with the department, not the extra scrutiny committee. They ask for it.
Okay.
But it's something we could flag up maybe. And
I think, Chair, it's getting that definitive set of guidance for committees to know exactly what happens when, and it's something the Finance Committee's always been trying to do, but this committee will have another go.
Okay, great. That is grand. The next, unless there's any other comments, the next agenda item is correspondence. This week's correspondence starts at page 498 of the meeting pack. There are just two items, the first of which is capital expenditure and the ISNI investing activity report. Correspondence from the Economy Committee, which is written to the Strategic Investment Board in respect of the ISNI investing activity reports, which are sent to the committee on a monthly basis. It had asked for capital expenditure across higher education and city and growth deals to be included in the ISNI reports, plural. The committee was also informed that a subgroup has recently been established to review what data is being collected and for what purpose in order to enable improvements. Ask members to note this correspondence. I keep reading out my instructions. This really has been a long meeting. Ask members to very Ron Burgundy. Going a bit Ron Burgundy there.
You being transparent.
I know, it's media and transparent. Members, that's the note, unless anybody wishes to make any comment on that. Clerk?
Just perhaps usefully on this, it would be a useful tracker if it could be possibly done more widely on the city and region growth deals. Members will recall that the briefing the committee had, there was discussion of around, I think, a sum of 50 million plus that was likely to be drawn down in this financial year around the projects, and this is a big leap forward. And it's trying to find an appropriate mechanism to try and capture that so the committee can scrutinise it more effectively. Obviously there'll be interest across committees, but Chair, if members are content on the back of that letter, it might be worth the committee writing to the Minister to ask, would there be potential for a more fulsome capture of the financial movement within those deals in that report?
That makes sense. I think that makes complete sense. Okay. The next agenda item is the Examiner of Statutory Rules report. The copy of their 19th report is in the meeting pack. There are no rules that are relevant to this committee, so I don't think we need to dwell on that. Next agenda item is the draft forward work programme. We obviously only have one further meeting. Unlike some committees which don't have any, we do have a meeting next week. So the clerk will just briefly update us on that. We have room 30. We've got a slightly bigger room.
We got room 30, Chair, because it obviously is not being used otherwise. We're starting earlier at 1 o'clock. We have confirmed GRO/NISRA officials around the permanent legislation that the committee has talked about on a number of occasions, so they are prepared. Well, they have been told about what they need to prepare for. So the other item that is already on the agenda for next week that I want members to necessarily consider how they want to proceed, and that is June monitoring round. I don't know whether the committee is really in a position to know whether or not that briefing is worth taking or not at this stage.
I suggest if we have June monitoring, we should have. If the executive makes a decision to do June monitoring, then we have to take. Are people happy with that?
We'll keep officials primed.
I'm fairly confident we won't need it though.
No.
Okay.
We leave it on the forward work programme, then officials are aware that they'll be called if there's something to brief on.
Just a quick one. Can I put an early apology in? I'll not be available for next week's meeting.
Fine. Okay.
We can always come back.
Yeah, we can drag everyone back from the summer holidays. Not their summer holidays, recess period. If anyone's still watching. Next item is any other business. Do any other members have any other business they wish to raise? No. In that case, date, time, place of next meeting is here. No, it's not in this room. It's in part of the building, but it's in room 30 at 1 o'clock. Yes. I'll put the question that the meeting does now adjourn. The committee does now adjourn. The meeting is now adjourned.
Committee Room 21. Sound.